The alarm had been screaming for 90 seconds, and in that time the second shift galley of HFYStories had emptied of every living thing except a young human who was still, unhurried, pouring coffee. Vesk saw it from the service hatch above the dish line, folded small in the crawlspace where the extractor fans pushed warm air across his chitin. He should have kept climbing. Every instinct the Illith carried under their plating told him to climb, to seal a bulkhead between himself and the corridor, to become one more clerk who survived by being somewhere else. Instead he watched, because the human at the drink station had not moved, and Vesk could not understand why a creature that small was not already dead. The thing coming down the corridor was Grava 7. The crew called it the Ruin. It stood taller at the shoulder than a Kelvas warrior stood on his feet, and it moved the way a landslide moves when it has decided to be patient, no wasted motion, no sound but the click of claws that had opened pressure doors like ration tins. Its hide was the gray of old iron, scarred in long pale seams where 3 separate handlers had tried to leash it and failed. It had killed 2 of them. The third had simply resigned, walked off the spindle at the next supply cycle, and never spoken about it again. That was the animal now standing in the galley doorway, and the human had his back to it. "You're up early," the human said. He said it to the coffee, not the beast. He tapped the dispenser twice to clear the line, the way he always did, and the machine coughed and gave him the good pour, the dark one that came after the sludge. Vesk had watched this human work 40 shifts and knew the ritual by heart. 2 taps, the good pour, one for the cup in his hand and one for the dented cup he kept upside down on the warmer, which he never filled, because there was never anyone on the third watch to fill it for. Tonight he filled it. He turned around with a cup in each hand, and he looked at the war beast that had cleared 4 decks of the spindle in under 2 minutes, and his face did not do any of the things a face was supposed to do. It did not slacken. It did not draw tight. He looked at the Ruin the way Vesk had seen him look at a delivery of frozen protein that had come in a day late, mildly, without surprise, as a problem that would sort itself out if he kept working. "Sit," the human said. The Ruin did not sit, but it stopped. Vesk felt the stop travel up through the deck plating and into the crawlspace, a stillness where there had been that terrible patient motion. The beast lowered its head, and the enormous nostrils worked, drawing the galley in, the steam, the burnt sugar smell of the machine, the human, and something in the great scarred shoulders eased by a fraction that only mattered because nothing about the Ruin had ever eased before. "Yeah," the human said, as if the beast had answered. "It's the good stuff. Second pot's always better." He crossed the galley. He did not hurry and he did not creep. He set the dented cup down on the deck, well out from his own feet, at the polite distance a man leaves a thing he does not intend to crowd. Then he stepped back to the drink station, leaned against it, and drank his own coffee while a killing machine considered the offering on the floor between them. Vesk's translator, still active in his ear, caught the human murmuring something too low to render. It came through as a soft null, a placeholder for words the machine could hear but not shape. Later Vesk would learn the human had only said the animal's name, the name he'd given it himself, without asking anyone's permission, and without consulting a single line of concordance protocol. The Ruin walked to the cup. It put its head down. Its tongue, black and broad as a boarding ramp, took the coffee in 3 passes and then sat back on its haunches with a sound like a cargo crane settling into its cradle. And for the first time in the 4 years Grava 7 had been aboard HFYStories, the war beast closed its eyes in a room that contained another living creature and did not open them again. The alarm was still screaming. Down the corridor Vesk could hear the heavy tramp of a containment team forming up, the whine of restraint gear charging, the flat panic of officers relaying commands to other officers who were relaying them back. And in the galley the human named Cole Pryor topped off his own cup, glanced at the sleeping mountain on his deck, and said, to no one in the tone of a man noting the weather, "Long shift for everybody, huh?" Vesk did not climb higher. He stayed in the hatch until his 4 legs ached, and he watched a human drink coffee beside the most feared animal in the sector. And he understood, dimly, the way you understand a thing years before you can say it, that he was going to spend the rest of his life telling people about this, and that no one was going to believe him. But to understand why the galley emptied, you had to understand the ruin, and to understand the ruin you had to go back further than most aboard the Spindle cared to. The Grava were not native to any world the Concordants had a comfortable name for. The Kelvas had bred them, or shaped them, or found them and made them worse. The histories disagreed, and the Kelvas did not clarify. What was agreed was that, in the long wars before the Concordants stitched 40 species into an uneasy peace, the Grava had been the weapon you sent when you had decided a place should not exist anymore. They did not need armor. They did not need air you could breathe or gravity you were used to. They had been built. One Kelvas archivist wrote in a document Vesk later read 3 times, for the Deathworlds, by a people who had already decided that mercy was a failure of engineering. There were 9 Grava left in the whole of Concordant space. That number was not an accident. It was a ceiling, negotiated across 2 decades of tense assembly sessions, because a great many species had wanted the number to be 0, and the Kelvas had refused, and the compromise had been 9 animals, each held under a treaty of containment, each a card the Kelvas could still lay on the table when the talking got hard. Grava 7 had come to Havern Spindle 4 years ago in a shielded transport, sedated to the edge of death, and had been installed in a reinforced hold on the Spindle's spine that the crew referred to only as the kennel and never entered. The kennel had its own atmosphere feeds, its own gravity, its own blast doors rated for hull breaches. The theory of Havern Spindle, the reason the Concordants kept a war beast on a supply-end garrison station at the edge of the Tavern Reach, was deterrence. The Reach was a bad neighborhood. Reaver crews worked its dark lanes, the sallow hand chief among them, and pirates who would take a supply station apart for its water alone. The presence of a Grava, even a caged one, was a line in the ledger that read, "This station is not worth what it will cost you." For 4 years the line had held, and for 4 years no one had needed to think too hard about the animal at the center of it. The Grava was a threat you pointed outward. It was not supposed to be a threat you lived with. The trouble, when it came the way trouble comes on a station, not as a catastrophe but as a maintenance ticket. The kennel's primary sedation feed was a closed loop that metered a suppressant into the hold's air on a schedule no one had touched in 4 years because no one had needed to. Vesk knew this because Vesk, junior clerk in the quartermaster's office, had processed the requisition for the feeds overdue servicing 11 days before the night the galley emptied. He had stamped it, rooted it, and flagged it non-urgent, because that was what the priority matrix told him it was. A closed loop with redundant backups servicing an animal that had slept for 4 years did not rate an urgent stamp. Vesk had done his job correctly. He would think about that a great deal afterward. The servicing crew had drained the primary loop to replace a valve assembly. The backup loop had engaged, as designed. The backup loop had then failed, not as designed, because the backup loop had been installed by the same contractor who installed the primary, using components from the same lot, and the lot had a flaw that the primary's 4 years of light duty had never stressed, and the backup's sudden full duty found in under a day. For perhaps 6 hours, the exact figure was disputed later. In the report Vesk was not cleared to read but read anyway. Grava 7 breathed clean air for the first time in 4 years. And then the animal, which had spent those years in a chemical fog too deep to dream in, woke all the way up, stood, and opened the kennel's blast door from the inside, using a method the door's engineers had certified as impossible. The first Vesk knew of any of it was the smell. He was on the 3rd watch in the quartermaster's office, 6 decks up the spine and a long walk from the galley, reconciling a manifest against a delivery that had come in short by 2 pallets of water reclaim filters. It was tedious work, and Vesk was good at it, and he had settled into the particular contentment of an illith with a spreadsheet when the air handling changed, and the office filled with a smell like scorched mineral and old blood. He looked up. Through the office's narrow window, the corridor lights had gone from their night cycle amber to the hard white of a general alert, and had begun, one by one, down the length of the spine, to shift to red. His station manager, an older illith named Taub, whom Vesk respected the way you respect a wall, came out of the inner office moving faster than Vesk had ever seen him move. "Kennel breach," Taub said. "Seal the office. Now." "Sir, the manifest." "The manifest is worth nothing if you're worth nothing," Taub said, which was, in illith, a proverb and not an insult, and he threw the internal bolt himself. Through the window, Vesk watched the station try to save itself. It was not, he would say later, a poor effort. Havern Spindle drilled for hull breach and boarding and reactor fault, and the crew fell into their drills with the discipline of people who had rehearsed the wrong emergency, but rehearsed hard. Bulkheads dropped in sequence, cutting the spine into segments. Containment teams, Kelvas mostly, the only species with the mass to carry the restraint gear the treaty required, mustered at the kennel end. Non-essential crew were routed spinward, toward the hab rings and the life pods, in an orderly flood of every color and shape of body the concordance had ever registered. And the bulkheads did not hold, and the containment teams did not contain, and the orderly flood became a rout, because the animal moving down the spine was not obeying any of the assumptions the drills were built on. It did not charge the containment teams. Vesk saw the feeds, the office had a security repeater, and Taub, once the office was sealed, let him watch, because there was nothing else to do and because Taub was a kind wall. The ruin came down the spine at a walk. When a bulkhead dropped in front of it, it did not batter the bulkhead. It went to the bulkhead's edge, hooked a claw into the seam where the door met its frame, and drew the door out of the frame the way you might work a splinter out of a palm, slowly, with attention, without heat. When a containment team put itself between the ruin and the next segment, the team fired their restraint gear, and the gel tethers and the shock nets landed on the animal, and the animal walked through them, not with a roar, not with a display, but the way a man walks through tall grass, brushing it aside because it was in the way and it did not matter. 2 containment teams broke and ran. The report would call it a failure of unit cohesion. Vesk, who had watched it, would have called it the only clear-headed decision anyone made that night, because the alternative to running was to keep standing in front of a thing that regarded you with the flat, unhurried interest of a creature that had already priced you and found you cheap. The ruin was not enraged. That was the part the drills had no answer for. A raging animal you could bait, channel, exhaust. The ruin was calm. It moved down the spine of Havern Spindle with the terrible economy of a thing that had woken up, found itself somewhere it did not recognize, and decided to walk until it found something that made sense. It went down the spine and it went down the decks, and its path, the security repeater drew it in a red line as the reports came in bent, gradually, toward the galley. Later, people would build theories about why. The galley's air handling vented the smell of cooking across 4 decks, and a hungry animal follows food. That was the official line. Vesk did not think it was food. He had watched the ruin refuse, on its way to the galley, an open storeroom of the exact protein rations the Grava had been documented to eat. It had walked past the food. It had followed something else down through the dark station, past every fleeing body it could have priced and taken, and what it found at the end of the trail was a young human on the 3rd watch who had not run, because the young human had not, at that point, entirely understood that he was supposed to. Cole Pryor had been on Havern Spindle for 2 months and 11 days, and in that time exactly 1 person had told him about the animal in the kennel. That person was Vesk, though neither of them had thought of the conversation as important at the time. It had happened over a requisition. Cole ran the third watch galley, which was a job so far down the Spindle's org chart that the quartermaster's office dealt with it through a junior clerk, and the junior clerk was Vesk. Twice a week Cole came up the spine with a list: protein, oil, the bitter concordance grain the machine turned into something almost like bread, and twice a week Vesk stamped it, and somewhere in the second month they had begun, in the flat way of two low creatures on a big station, to talk. Cole did not talk much. Vesk found this restful. Most humans Vesk had met, there were 4 aboard, all of them technicians or contractors, all of them recent, humanity being a new and much-discussed member of the Concordance, talked in a way that Vesk found exhausting, a constant narration of their own competence. Cole narrated nothing. He came up the spine, he read his list off a scuffed slate, he asked once whether the oil substitution was going to be permanent, and when Vesk said it was, he nodded and adjusted, and that was the whole of it. It had been on the 4th or 5th of these visits that the kennel came up. Cole had asked idly what the big sealed section on the spine schematic was, the one his galley's water lines routed around in a wide, expensive loop. Vesk had told him. He had told him about the grava, the treaty, the 9 animals, the 4 years. He had told him because Vesk believed in giving a colleague accurate information, that Grava 7 had killed 2 of its handlers, and that the standing order aboard the Spindle was that no crew member below command rank was ever, under any circumstance, to approach the kennel or its access corridors. Cole had listened to all of it with his coffee going cold in his hand, and at the end he had said only, "Huh. So it's a working dog nobody ever walked." Vesk had not known several of those words. The translator had rendered working dog as a compound of labor and companion animal that made no sense to Vesk, and he had asked, and Cole had explained briefly that on the human death world there were animals, predators, pack hunters, built for the cold and the dark and the killing of larger things, that humans had spent longer than their recorded history turning into partners, guards, herders, hunters, friends. That you took a creature bred to bring down something twice your size, and you gave it a name and a job and a place by the fire, and it gave you back a loyalty that Cole, groping for the word in a language not built for it, had finally just called the whole thing. The animal gives you the whole thing. Vesk had filed this under the general heading of human eccentricity and thought no more about it. Humans said things like that. Humanity was a deathworld species. That was the file every other member of the Concordance kept on them, the reason they were treated with the wary courtesy you extend to a small creature that has, on inspection, an unreasonable number of teeth. Humans came from a world that had tried, by every measure the Concordance used, to kill them and had failed, and the humans had responded to that failure not with gratitude but with a bewildering warmth toward the very things that had done the trying. They kept predators in their homes. They kept them in their beds. They named the storms. None of this had seemed relevant to a requisition for cooking oil. Vesk had stamped the list and sent the human back down the spine to his galley, and had not thought about the conversation again until the night he watched, from a service hatch. The same human set a cup of coffee on the deck in front of the animal. No one aboard was allowed to approach, and call it softly, by a name. The containment failure went to command, and command, in the person of the station's ranking officer, went to the galley, and that was where the second act of the night began. Vesk had come down from the office by then. This required some explanation, and the explanation was Toab. When the security repeater showed the ruin lying down in the galley and staying down, the flood of panic in the office comms had curdled into confusion, and Toab, who had spent 30 years watching command make decisions and had opinions about most of them, had said, half to himself, "They are going to do something stupid." And then he had looked at Vesk, and at the repeater, and had made a decision of his own. "You've dealt with the human," Toab said. "The cook." "Yes, sir." "Then you're a witness who can be useful instead of a witness who's in the way. Come with me. Stay behind me. Say nothing unless command asks you directly, and if they ask you directly, tell them the truth in the fewest words the truth allows. He unbolted the office. And Vesk, if I tell you to run, do not finish your sentence first. They went down the spine together against the last of the fleeing crew, an old clerk and a young one moving toward the thing everyone else was moving away from. And Vesk, who would remember the whole night in more detail than he wanted, remembered thinking that this was the bravest thing he had ever seen Taub do, and that Taub was doing it at a walk, with his hands folded, the way he walked everywhere. The galley, when they reached it, had become a standoff, and the standoff had a shape Vesk recognized at once as wrong. Command had set up at the corridor junction outside the galley's main hatch, Station Master Orit Vol, a broad gray Dinvaki with the calm of long authority, flanked by 2 Kelvas containment officers in full restraint rig, and behind them a specialist Vesk did not recognize, a Kelvas in the deep red harness of the beast handler caste, who had clearly been woken and rushed, and who wore the particular fury of a proud creature summoned to fix another creature's mess. That was Overwarden Talon Cass, though Vesk did not yet know the name. He knew only that of all the people at the junction, the red-harnessed one was the only one looking at the human in the galley with hatred instead of fear, and that this was somehow more frightening than the animal. Inside the galley, past the hatch, Cole Pryor had gone back to work. He had a war beast asleep against the base of his prep counter, its flank rising and falling slow enough that you could have set a clock by it, and he was cleaning the drink station, wiping down the machine, stacking the night's cups, because the night's work did not stop being the night's work just because the night had gotten strange. He glanced up when command arrived, took in the restraint rig and the drawn gear and the red harness, and said, in a voice pitched low so as not to wake the thing sleeping against his counter, "You're going to want to keep it down. He's had a long day." Station Master Vol, to his lasting credit, kept it down. "Crewman," he said, "step away from the animal and come toward my voice." Slowly. "I do that," Cole said. "He wakes up. He wakes up with all of you standing there in the murder suits. That's a bad morning for everybody." He wrung out his cloth. "He's asleep. First time in 4 years, from what your clerk tells me. Let's not." It was, Vesk thought, an extraordinary thing to hear a person say to a station master. It was more extraordinary that the station master appeared to be considering it. Overwarden Cass was not considering it. "It is not asleep," Cass said, and his voice was the low grind of a species built for volume holding itself to a hiss. "It is between decisions. That is what they do. You have not tamed it, animal keeper. You have wandered into the eye of it and mistaken the calm for safety." He unslung something from his harness, a long instrument Vesk did not like the look of. "Move away from my asset before it finishes deciding, and I have to explain to the Treaty Commission why there is a dead human smeared across a food preparation surface." "My asset," Cole repeated. He set the cloth down on the counter, and the movement was so ordinary that both Kelvas officers flinched. "Been here 2 months. Nobody's fed it, nobody's walked it, nobody's cleaned its box, and it's your asset." He looked at the sleeping animal, then back at Cass. "Sure. You will not lecture me on the husbandry of a war beast," Cass said. "Wouldn't dream of it," Cole said. "I'm a cook." Vesk, standing behind Taub, behind command, understood that he was watching 2 entirely different creatures fail to occupy the same idea. To Cass, the ruin was an asset, a treaty article, a weapon under law, a thing with a designation and a containment schedule, and a value that could be entered in a ledger. To Cole, the ruin was, apparently, a large animal that had come into his galley and lain down, and the correct response to a large animal that had lain down was to let it sleep and keep your voice low. Neither of them was going to convince the other, because they were not disagreeing. They were looking at 2 different animals that happened to occupy the same enormous scarred body. "Overwarden," Station Master Vol said quietly. "A word." They stepped back from the hatch, command drawing together, and Vesk, because Taub had positioned them well, and because Illith hearing is better than most species credit, caught the shape of it. The suppressant. Cass wanted the suppressant. He had brought, in the long instrument, a delivery lance loaded with the same compound that had fogged the ruin for 4 years, enough to drop the animal where it lay. He wanted to sedate it through the galley hatch, drag it back to a repaired kennel, and file a report that made the whole night into a maintenance footnote. It was, Vesk had to admit, the plan the protocols would have written. Val's objection was quieter and Vesk caught only pieces. The delivery lance was accurate to a body length. The human was inside a body length of the target. If the lance struck the human died. The compound was calibrated for a grava, and a grava outmassed the human 40 times over. And if the lance struck the grava and the grava did not go down clean, if there was the interval Cass himself had described, the interval between the dart and the dark, in which the animal understood what had been done to it and had a few seconds left to decide how it felt about that, then the human was inside a body length of a war beast in the last lucid moment of its rage. Then the human moves first, Cass said, not bothering to lower his voice for that part. Order it out, it is crew, it obeys you. He, said a voice from the galley, can hear all of you. They turned. Cole had not moved from the counter, but he had, at some point, poured himself another cup of coffee, and he stood now with it steaming in his hand, watching command debate his death with an expression of mild, tired patience. I'm not going to move, Cole said, and I'll tell you why, and then you can do what you want because you've got the suits and I've got a spatula, but you should hear it first. He took a sip. That animal followed a smell down 6 decks and past a room full of its own food to lie down next to me. It didn't touch me. It didn't touch anybody it passed, and it passed a lot of people, and every one of them was easier than me. It walked through your nets. It walked through your teams. It could have opened this station like a can, and it didn't because it wasn't looking for a fight. It was looking for the one thing on this whole station that wasn't screaming. He nodded at the sleeping mass. It found a guy making coffee, and it lay down. First time in 4 years, your own clerk says. You want to fix that with a needle. The junction was silent. Even the alarm had cycled down at last, leaving the deep hum of the spindle and the slow tide of the animal's breathing. You're afraid of it, Cole went on, and there was no contempt in it, just observation. All of you. That's the whole thing right there. You've been afraid of it for 4 years, and you kept it in a box, and you kept it asleep because an afraid thing you can't control is the worst thing there is. I get it. But you can't make a thing you're afraid of feel safe. It doesn't work. It's never worked. You can only make it more afraid, and a more afraid animal that size, he gestured mildly at the being that could remove blast doors like splinters. You already know how that goes. You've got the scars in the hide to prove it. And you are not afraid, Cass said. It was not a question, it was an accusation. Cole considered it honestly. I'm a little afraid, he said. I'd be stupid not to be, but being afraid and acting afraid are 2 different things, and he can smell the difference. He set his cup down. Where I'm from, you learn that early or you don't learn anything. You don't run from the big ones, you don't scream. You keep your hands where they can see them, and you keep your voice low, and you let them come to you. He looked at the ruin, and for the first time something moved in the human's flat face, not fear, not triumph, something older and quieter that Vesk had no word for. My grandfather ran a place at the edge of a bad wood. Things came out of it. Some of them you shot. Most of them you fed once at the edge of the light, and after that they walked your fence line at night and nothing else did. He shrugged. This is just a bigger fence. Overwarden Cass did not sedate the animal that night, and the reason he did not was not Cole's speech. The reason was that when Cass raised the delivery lance, slowly, sighting past the hatch, and Vesk saw the exact instant he committed to it, saw the red-harnessed shoulders settle into the line, the ruin opened its eyes. It did not lift its head. It did not rise. It simply opened its eyes, both of them, and looked across the galley and through the hatch and down the corridor, directly at the point of the lance and the creature holding it. And Grava 7, which had walked through shock nets without a sound, made a sound. It was very low. Vesk felt it before he heard it in the deck, in his plating and the fluid behind his eyes. It was not a roar. A roar would have been a relief. A roar was a thing with an end. This was a sustained subsonic pressure, felt more than heard, the sound a fault line might make in the last hour before it decided, and it did exactly one thing to every creature at the junction. It informed them, below the level of thought in the oldest language there was, that the animal knew where the lance was, knew what it was for, and had formed an opinion. Cass lowered the lance. His hand, Vesk noticed, was not entirely steady. The sound stopped. The ruin closed its eyes. Against the counter, the human had not so much as turned around, but he had, Vesk saw, put one hand down and back, palm open, resting lightly on the great scarred shoulder, and he was moving it in a slow, absent circle, the way you might gentle a thing that had woken from a bad dream, and under his hand the animal's breathing lengthened again towards sleep. "Told you," Cole said to the coffee. "Long day." Station Master Val made the only decision available to a wise creature at that junction. He ordered a perimeter, not a sedation. The galley would be sealed at both ends. No one would enter and no one would provoke. The human, since the human declined to leave, and since removing the human appeared likely to end the station, would remain with the animal and command would convene, and the treaty commission would be notified. And in the morning, everyone, Vesk noticed, believed that the morning would fix this, as though the animal were a spill that would evaporate. In the morning they would decide what to do with a war beast that had, in defiance of 4 years of protocol and several centuries of Kelvas doctrine, adopted a cook. The perimeter held for 6 hours. Then the reports began to arrive, and the reports changed everything, because it turned out the spindle had a great deal more to worry about than one sleeping animal. Vesk was reassigned that same night, and the reassignment was Taub's doing, and it was the second gift the old clerk gave him. "Command needs a liaison to the galley," Taub told him in the office after the perimeter went up. "Someone the human knows who can carry messages in and out without the animal deciding the messenger is a problem. They asked me. I'm too old to sit on a deck for 6 hours, and you've dealt with the human and you didn't run when I told you not to." He said this last without emphasis, but Vesk understood it was the highest thing Taub had ever said to him. "It is dangerous. You may refuse. If you refuse, I will think no less of you, and I will send someone else, and that someone else will be worse at it because they will be afraid and the animal will smell it. You are also afraid, but you are the kind of afraid that keeps working. I have watched you do it with manifests for a year." He folded his hands. "Will you sit on the deck, Vesk?" Vesk sat on the deck. He would sit on it off and on for 11 days, and in those 11 days he learned more about humans, and about the animal and about himself, than in the whole of his prior life. And most of what he learned by doing exactly what Cole did, which was to sit quietly, keep his voice low, and let the enormous thing in the room ignore him until ignoring him became a kind of permission. The first day was the hardest, because the first day Vesk had to walk into the galley. He did it the way Cole told him to, through the hatch over the comm. "Come in slow," Cole's voice said in his ear, flat and unhurried. "Don't stop in the doorway. A stop thing in a doorway makes him look. Walk to the end of the dish line and sit down on the floor, not a stool, the floor, and put your hands where he can see them and leave them there. Don't look at him. Look at me. He'll check you out. Let him. Whatever he does, don't move fast, and for the love of everything, don't run. You run, you're prey. You sit, your furniture, be furniture." Vesk had walked in on 4 aching legs, and had, at the end of the dish line, become furniture. The ruin had checked him out. Vesk would carry the memory of it in his body for the rest of his life. The great head swinging around, the nostrils working, the animal rising, unhurried, and crossing the galley to stand over him, so close that Vesk was inside the smell of it, scorched mineral and old blood, and underneath, faintly, coffee. It had lowered its head until one eye, larger than Vesk's whole face, was a handspan from him, and it had looked at him with that flat, unhurried, pricing interest. And Vesk had sat on the floor with his hands in his lap, and had done the single bravest thing of his career, which was nothing. "Good," Cole said quietly from the counter. "You're doing great. He's just reading you. Everything you're feeling, he's got it off you already, so there's no point hiding it. Just don't act on it, feel scared, sit still, that's the trick, that's the whole trick." The ruin had read him for a long moment. Then it had made a sound, a short, low chuff, nothing like the fault line pressure of the night before, and turned and walked back to Cole and lain down against the prep counter, and Vesk had understood that he had passed, though he could not have said what the test was. "He likes you," Cole said. "How can you tell?" Vesk managed. "He didn't eat you," Cole said, and went back to the drink station, and made, without asking, 2 cups of coffee, one for himself and one which he set on the floor at the polite distance, near the animal, which lapped it up while Vesk watched and thought that he had woken up that morning a junior clerk, and would apparently go to sleep that night the second creature on Havern's spindle to survive being read by a grava, and that both of these facts were true and neither of them made sense. By the second day, the ritual had a shape, and the shape was Cole's, and it did not change. The third watch ran from what the spindle called midnight to the 4th hour bell. Cole worked it as he had always worked it, which was the thing Vesk came slowly to understand was the entire secret. Nothing changed. There was a war beast in the galley now, and the galley was sealed, and command watched on the repeater, and the treaty commission was 3 days out, and Cole made breakfast prep for a shift that could not reach the galley to eat it, because the making of it was the point. He cleaned the drink station at the top of the watch. He ran the machine twice to clear the line. At the mid-watch he made 2 cups of the good coffee, the second pot, and he set one on the floor. He talked, low and constant, a running murmur of nothing, the oil substitution, the short delivery, the state of the machine, the weather on a world neither he nor the animal had ever seen. And the animal lay in the sound of it the way Vesk's people lay in warm air. "You just talk to it," Vesk said on the second day. "Talk to him," Cole corrected, mild. "Yeah." "About nothing." "About nothing important," Cole said. "That's the point. Important's got tension in it. He can hear tension. You talk to a nervous animal about important things, your voice does something, and he clocks it, and now he's nervous too." He wiped down the counter. "You talk about the coffee being a little bitter today. You talk about how the seal on the number 3 cooler's going. You keep it boring. Boring's the gift. Nobody ever gave him boring before." He glanced at the sleeping mass. 4 years in a box, doped to the eyeballs, and every single time a person came near him it was to do something to him, a needle, a net, a scan. He never once got just a guy talking about the cooler seal. He didn't know that was allowed. Vesk thought about the requisition he had stamped non-urgent. He did not say anything, but something in his silence carried because Cole looked at him and said not unkindly, "Wasn't you. The box was here before you and me both. Everybody just did the next thing on the list. That's how you end up with a monster. Nobody's cruel. Everybody's just doing the next thing on the list." He set down a cup. "That's the part your overwarden's never going to get. He thinks the animal's the problem. The animal was never the problem. The list was the problem." It was on the second day, too, that Vesk learned the name. Cole called the animal it mostly when he talked to Vesk, because Vesk was concordance and concordance called the graver it. But when he talked to the animal, low, constant, about nothing, he called it a sound the translator kept rendering as null, and on the second day Vesk asked what the word was, and Cole told him. "Bear," Cole said. "What is a bear?" "Big animal back home." Cole considered how to explain it. "Comes out of the deep woods, strong enough to open a truck. Most of the time it just wants to be left alone and eat and sleep, and if you let it do that, it'll walk right past you. But you get between it and what it loves, or you make it feel cornered, or you're just unlucky," he shrugged. People are real respectful of bears where I'm from. Respectful's the word, not scared exactly. You don't fear a bear, you respect it, you give it room. You keep your food locked up and your voice down, and you never ever get between it and the way out. He nodded at the ruin. Seemed to fit. You named the most dangerous animal in the sector, Vesk said slowly. After an animal from your home that is also very dangerous. Named him after an animal from home I know how to be around, Cole said. That's different. That's the important part. He picked up his cup. I don't know how to be around a grava. Nobody does, that's why he's in a box. But I know exactly how to be around a bear. So that's what he is now. Makes it simple. You treat him like a bear, he acts like a bear, and a bear's a thing you can live next to your whole life if you're not a fool about it. He drank. Which most people are, about bears and about most things. Vesk wrote none of this down, because there was nowhere on a requisition form for it. He remembered it instead, all of it, and later when the Treaty Commission asked him under oath, in a room with more admirals in it than he had known the Concordance possessed, to explain how a food service contractor had accomplished what the entire Kelvas beast-handling caste had failed to accomplish in 4 years. Vesk had said only, he called it a bear, and had watched the whole room fail to understand and had thought, no, of course you don't. That's the whole thing and you don't have it. On the third day, before the commission arrived, Command tried to do it without the human, and the trying taught Vesk more about the whole affair than anything anyone said to him. The logic was Command's, and it was not stupid. If the animal could be gentled by a routine, the coffee, the quiet, the fixed hour, then the routine was the thing that mattered, and a routine could be performed by anyone. The human was a food service contractor with no clearance and no standing, and a growing habit of telling station masters what he would and would not do. Better, Command reasoned, to learn the routine, teach it to a proper handler, and remove the station's dependence on a man who could not be ordered. So on the third day a Kelvas handler was sent to the galley, not Cass. A younger one from the security complement, chosen because his file said steady, and Cole was asked to step aside and coach him through it, and Cole, to Vesk's surprise, agreed. Sure, Cole said, he wants to learn it, I'll show him. It's not a secret, there's no secret. He walked the young handler through it at the top of the watch, clean the drink station, run the machine twice, make 2 cups, set one on the floor at the polite distance, keep your voice low, talk about nothing. That's it, Cole said. That's the whole thing. You do that every night, same hour, and you don't want anything from him, and after a while he stops watching you like a problem. He handed the young handler the dented cup. Go on, set it down, slow. Then back off and lean on the counter and talk about the coolers, or whatever you talk about. The young handler did everything right. Vesk watched from his place at the end of the dish line, and he could not have named a single thing the handler did wrong. He cleaned the station. He ran the machine twice. He made 2 cups and his hands were steady, and he crossed the galley at a good unhurried pace, and he set the dented cup on the floor at very nearly the polite distance, and he backed off, and he leaned on the counter, and he began, in a low, even voice, to talk about the state of the No. 3 cooler seal. The animal did not rise. It watched the young handler from against the counter, one eye open, and it did not rise, and it did not lap the coffee, and the coffee went cold on the floor. And after a while the low-pressure Vesk had felt at the lance on the first night came up through the deck again, faint, a warning at the very edge of hearing, and the young handler's even voice acquired a thread in it, and the thread was the end of the experiment. Okay, Cole said quietly, come off it slow, come stand by me. The young handler came off it, slow, and stood by Cole, and the low pressure faded, and the animal put its eyes shut, and the cold coffee sat on the floor between them like a verdict. I did it exactly as you showed me, the young handler said. He was not angry, he was bewildered, and the bewilderment was honest, and Vesk felt for him. Every step, the same steps. Why did it? Because you wanted it to work, Cole said. The young handler looked at him. You did everything right and you wanted it to work, Cole said, and he could smell that the whole time. The wanting. You weren't setting a cup down for a bear because it was mid-watch and that's what you do at mid-watch. You were setting a cup down to make the animal trust you, so command could take me off it so you could be the guy who handled the grava. That's a lot of wanting and it was coming off you the whole time, and he's got 4 years of practice smelling exactly that. Every hand that ever came near him wanted something. Yours did too. He clocked it before you set the cup down. Cole picked up the cold cup off the floor. It's not a technique. That's what nobody wants to hear. You can do all the steps perfect and it won't work because the steps aren't the thing. The thing is that I genuinely do not care whether he drinks the coffee. I set it down because it's mid-watch. If he drinks it, fine. If he doesn't, fine. I'm going to make it again tomorrow either way. That's the part you can't do on command's schedule because command needs it to work, so you need it to work, so you want it and he can smell it. He dumped the cold coffee. Sorry, you did fine. You did everything I said. It's just that everything you said isn't the thing. I know how that sounds. I don't know how else to say it. The young handler went away and reported to command, honestly, that the routine could not be taught, at least not to him, at least not that way. And command, being command, took this as evidence that the human was withholding some part of the technique. And it was 2 more days and one arrived commission before anyone above the rank of clerk began to suspect that the human was withholding nothing, that there was nothing to withhold, that the reason a food service contractor could gentle a war beast and a trained handler could not was the single thing command was constitutionally unable to accept, that the animal preferred the creature who needed nothing from it, and that need could not be faked, and that the entire apparatus of command, with its schedules and its outcomes and its urgent, reasonable wanting, was, from the animal's point of view, simply one more hand reaching into the box. Vesk understood it, sitting on the deck that 3rd day, watching the cold coffee go into the disposal. He understood it because he had spent 2 days learning to want nothing on that same deck, and had felt the animal's regard change as he learned it, from the flat pricing interest of the 1st day to the drowsy tolerance of the 2nd, and he knew in his own body that the change had not come from anything he did. It had come from something he stopped doing. He had stopped bracing to be useful. He had stopped, for the first time in a life spent being useful, needing the room to give him anything back. And the animal had felt him stop, the way it felt everything, and had filed him at last under the one heading it trusted, the heading the whole galaxy had spent 400 years failing to earn, harmless because wanting nothing and therefore welcome. You get it, Cole said to him that night without being asked. He had been watching Vesk watch the young handler fail. You already get it, I can tell. You went quiet different than you used to. He made 2 cups. He set one on the floor and the animal rose and lapped it easy, unbothered, the way it never had for the handler. Took me 1 night. Took you 2 days. That young handler, he'll never get it, not because he's dumb. He's not dumb because his whole job is wanting the animal to be something, and you can't hold that job and put the wanting down at the same time. You'd have to quit the job first. He drank his coffee. That's why it's always going to be some nobody who cracks it. A cook, a clerk, somebody with nothing to prove and no animal they're supposed to produce. The galaxy's going to spend the next 100 years sending its best handlers at these things and wondering why the coffee doesn't work, and the answer's going to be sitting on a galley deck the whole time, being furniture, wanting nothing, and nobody's going to think to ask the furniture. He glanced at Vesk, and there was something almost like affection in it, dry and level, the same tone he used on the animal. Congratulations, you're the furniture now. It's the most important job on the station and nobody's ever going to give you a medal for it. Get used to that part. That's the whole rest of it right there. The treaty commission arrived on the 4th day, and it arrived angry, and its anger had a shape that Vesk, sitting on the galley deck twice a day, was uniquely placed to watch bend against the one thing on the spindle that would not bend. The commission was 3. A Denvaki jurist named Sorrel Ka, gray and slow and precise. A fourth observer whose species communicated through a slick of shifting color across its mantle, and whose translated speech came through as though read from a page. And chairing it, a Kelvas of the governing caste, first speaker Davin who was to overwarden caste what a general is to a favored sergeant. The authority caste served, and the authority caste had spent 4 days feeding a version of events designed to produce exactly one outcome. The outcome caste wanted was the one his caste had wanted from the start: sedate the animal, repair the kennel, restore the article to containment, file the human incident as an operational anomaly, and if the human proved inconvenient, transfer the human off the spindle, back down the Concordance's long supply chain to some other station where he could make coffee for people who had never heard of grava. Restore, in short, the world to the shape it had held for 4 years, in which the war beast was a weapon that slept in a box, and no one had to think about what it was. The commission had come to ratify this. What the commission found, when it convened on the 4th day in the wardroom 2 decks up from the galley, was that the facts had gotten loose, and the facts did not support the story. Vesk was called to the wardroom to give an account. He gave it the way Taub had taught him, the truth, in the fewest words the truth allowed. He told them the animal had come to the galley of its own choosing, past its own food. He told them it had not touched any crewman on its path. He told them it had lain down beside the human and slept, and that it slept every night now, and that it had, on the first night, made a sound at the delivery lance that Vesk did not have words for, and that it had not made that sound since, because no one had raised a lance since. He told them the human worked a normal shift and talked about the coolers. He told them, when Sorrel Ka asked him directly, that in his judgment, the judgment of a junior clerk, which he offered only because he was asked, the animal was not sedated and was not cornered and was not, so far as he could see, dangerous to anyone who did not make it so. You are not qualified to assess the disposition of a war beast, Cass said. No, Overwarden, Vesk agreed. I am qualified to report what I saw. First speaker asked me what I saw. I am reporting it. First speaker Davin who had said very little, looked at Vesk for a long moment and then said the thing that turned the commission. The clerk saw it, Davin said. The Overwarden did not. The Overwarden has read reports. He turned his heavy-plated head. Talon. You have told me for 4 days that the article is between decisions, that it has not accepted the human but merely paused. 4 days is a long pause. It is an animal for speaker, not a... It is our animal, Davin said, and our name is on it, and if it has done a thing no grava has done in the memory of the caste, I will not have that thing sedated and filed before I have looked at it with my own eyes. He rose. Take me to the galley. Cass's face did the thing Vesk had seen it do at the junction on the first night, the fury of a proud creature watching control slip. But he took the first speaker to the galley, because that was the order, and Vesk went too, because Vesk was the liaison, and the commission descended 2 decks to look, for the first time, at the actual animal instead of the reports of it. They looked through the hatch, because Cole would not let them in, and Cole not letting them in was itself a thing the commission had to absorb. With respect, first speaker, Cole said, he had learned the ranks by then. Vesk had taught him, you can look all you want, but you come in with the murder suits and the red harness, he wakes up unhappy, and I've spent 4 days getting him to where he sleeps through the 4th hour bell. So look through the door. He was making coffee. It was mid-watch. He made 2 cups. He set one on the floor. You want to see him at his worst, bring a lance in here. You want to see him at his best, watch this. They watched. The ruin rose from against the counter. The commission tensed, all 3 of them, and Cass's hand went to his harness, and it crossed the galley to the cup on the floor, and it lapped the coffee in 3 passes of that boarding ramp tongue, and then it did the thing Vesk had not seen before and would never forget. It turned, and it put its enormous scarred head down into the human's chest, and the human staggered half a step under the weight of it and then braced and stood there, one hand coming up to rest between the animal's eyes, and the war beast leaned its whole terrible head against a food service contractor and closed its eyes, and the human said, "Lo, yeah. I know, big day, lot of suits at the door." The fourth observer's mantle ran through a fast slick of color. The translator rendered it, a beat late, flat as a filing. The article is displaying affiliative behavior toward the human, trust posture, vulnerability offered. In my prior study of Grava, this behavior has no precedent. I have no category for it. He doesn't need a category, Cole said. He needs a nap and a guy who doesn't jump. That's all it ever was. First speaker Davin watched the war beast of his own caste lean its head into a human, and something moved in the heavy-plated face that Vesk could not read, because Vesk had never learned to read grief on a Kelvas, and it would be some time before he understood that grief was what he was looking at, the grief of a creature realizing that a thing his people had spent centuries deciding was impossible had been possible the whole time, and that the only reason no Kelvas had ever seen it was that no Kelvas had ever tried to give a Grava a boring afternoon. "Overwarden," Davin said quietly, "how is a Grava trained to the harness?" Cass answered stiffly, "Isolation, dependency. The handler controls the food, the water, the light. The article learns that all comfort proceeds from the handler, and that all pain proceeds from disobedience. In time, the article kills the handler," Davin said, "in 7 cases of 9 at some point in the first decade. I have read the caste histories, Talon, I have read all of them." He looked through the hatch. "This one has killed 2, and it has laid its head in a stranger's hands, and the stranger controls nothing. Not its food, it has refused food, not its light, not its pain. The stranger has offered it exactly one thing." He was silent a moment. "A hot drink, and quiet. And the assumption that it would behave." First speaker: "We have been doing it backwards," Davin said, "for 400 years." And he turned and walked back up the spine, and the commission followed him. And Overwarden Talon Cass stood alone at the hatch for a moment looking at the human and the animal with an expression that Vesk, this time, read perfectly, because it needed no translation in any language. The expression of a creature who has built his whole life on a thing and been good at it and been honored for it, and has just been told by the authority he serves in front of a clerk that the thing was wrong from the beginning. That was the moment Cass became dangerous, not on the first night with the lance. On the 4th day at the hatch, when his life's work broke against a cup of coffee. The commission did not sedate the animal. This was the correct decision, and it satisfied no one, which is often the mark of a correct decision. First speaker Davin ordered a study. The article Davin began pointedly to call it the animal, and the shift rippled through the spindle like a change in cabin pressure. The animal would remain in the galley under the current arrangement. The human, crewman Cole Pryor, was seconded from food service to a role the commission invented on the spot and could not quite name. The closest the paperwork came was conditioning liaison, which Cole read off his slate, snorted at, and never used. The 4th observer would document. Vesk would continue to run messages, and the caste would send from the homeworld its records, every Grava that had ever been trained, every handler that had ever died, the whole 400-year ledger of isolation and dependency and pain, so that first speaker Davin could sit in his quarters and read it against the sight of a war beast leaning its head into a human's chest and try to understand the size of what his people had gotten wrong. It was a wise order. It was also, Vesk understood later, a slow one, and slowness was the one luxury Havern Spindle did not have, because out in the dark lanes of the Tavern Reach, something had noticed that the spindle's deterrent was no longer pointed outward. The first sign was in the manifests, and Vesk, who still thought like a clerk even while he sat on a war beast's deck, was the one who saw it. The spindle's deterrence had always rested on a fact that everyone in the Reach knew and no one said aloud. The station had a Grava. You did not hit a station with a Grava, because a grava did not stay behind a wall when its station was attacked. That was the entire point of keeping one. The reason the treaty allowed 9 such animals to exist at garrison stations at all. A reaver crew that boarded Havern-Spindle would find itself sharing the station with a war beast, and no cargo in the Reach was worth that. But the grava had gotten loose. The breach had gone out on the emergency channels. You could not hide a kennel breach. The whole sector's traffic control had logged the Spindle's automated alerts. And then the alerts had cycled down, and no follow-up had gone out, because command had been too busy with the actual animal to think about the story the silence told. And the story the silence told, to a careful listener in the dark, was, Havern-Spindle's war beast is out of its box, and the station has not put it back, and either the station cannot put it back or the beast is loose and rampaging, and in either case the station's deterrent is, for the first time in 4 years, in question. Vesk saw it in the traffic. The supply runs that routed through the Reach began, over the 4th and 5th days, to route around it. Independent haulers who had always taken on water and reclaim at the Spindle filed course changes. And in the gaps where the honest traffic thinned, Vesk's manifests began to show the other kind, sensor ghosts at the edge of the Spindle's range, contacts that appeared and did not answer and did not resolve, the careful, patient probing of predators testing whether a thing that had always been dangerous was dangerous still. He took it to Toab first, because Toab had taught him to take things to Toab first, and Toab looked at the traffic for a long time and said, "The sallow hand." "You don't know that, sir." "No," Toab agreed. "I know that when a wolf stops answering the door, the crows come to see if it died." "Take it to command." Vesk took it to command, and command, to its credit, took it seriously. And that was how, on the 6th day, Havern-Spindle came to be preparing for a boarding action at the exact moment. Its only real weapon was asleep in the galley with its head in a cook's lap, and its handling caste was in an uproar. And the one Kelvas aboard who best knew how to weaponize the animal had spent 2 days deciding that the animal, and the human, and the whole humiliating arrangement, were better destroyed than studied. Cole took the news of the reavers the way he took most news, which was to keep wiping down the counter and ask a practical question. "They come," he said. "What happens to him?" "To the animal." Vesk had brought the traffic reports down to the galley, low-voiced at mid-watch. That is complicated, Cole. The reason a station keeps a grava is that a grava defends the station. If the Spindle is boarded, the containment doctrine releases the animal against the boarders. That is the whole design. The animal is a weapon that lives in the station and fights for it when the station is threatened. Huh? Cole set down the cloth. He looked at the ruin which lay against the counter, one eye half open, tracking the low murmur of their voices with the drowsy attention it gave everything now. "So the plan, if the bad guys show up, is you open the doors and point him at them." "The doctrine," Vesk said carefully, "does not require pointing. The animal knows the station. It knows the crew now. It has spent 6 days learning our smells through the galley air," First Speaker Davin believes. "It defends its territory. The borders are not its territory. It resolves them." "Resolves them," Cole repeated. "It is the word in the doctrine." Cole was quiet for a while. He picked up his own coffee and he drank it, and he looked at the animal he had named after a thing from home he knew how to be around. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed, very slightly, in a way Vesk had learned to notice because the animal noticed it too. The ruin's half-open eye came fully open, reading the shift. "I named him," Cole said, "so I'd know how to treat him. You treat a bear like a bear, it acts like a bear. That was the deal. That was the whole deal I made in my head." He set the cup down. "And a bear'll defend its ground. That's real. That's a true thing about bears. You get between a bear and its own, it'll do what it does and it won't feel bad about it, and neither will I, because that's the animal and I signed up for the animal." He looked at Vesk. "But I want to be real clear about something, and I want you to carry it up the spine to your First Speaker exactly how I say it. I'm not pointing him at anybody. I'm not a handler. I don't have a harness and I don't want one. If the bad guys come and they come at the station and they come at," he paused, "at people I've decided are mine, then he's going to do what a bear does because that's what he is, and I'll stand right here while he does it. But nobody hands me a lance and tells me to aim my dog at a doorway. That's not what he is to me. That's what he was to them, and look how that went." He nodded at the scars in the hide. "You carry that up, word for word. They'll want to make him a weapon again the second it's useful, and I need it on the record before it's useful that the answer's no." Vesk carried it up the spine, word for word, and delivered it to Command, and Command received it in silence, and Overwarden Cass, who was in the room, said only, "You see, it has already begun to give the article orders, or believes it has. Either way, the human now stands between us and the use of our own deterrent in the middle of a boarding threat." He let that sit. "I have said from the first night that this arrangement is a liability. Here is the liability, first speaker, arriving exactly on schedule. When the sallow hand comes, and it is coming, the one weapon that can save this station will answer to a food service contractor who has just informed us he will not point it. I ask the Commission to reconsider sedation, not to punish the animal, to restore the chain of command over it before it costs us the station." And the terrible thing, Vesk thought, sitting in the back of the wardroom with his hands folded, was that Cass was not entirely wrong. First Speaker Davin did not order sedation, and the reason he gave surprised everyone in the wardroom, including, Vesk thought, himself. "The Overwarden is correct that the human stands between us and the old use of the animal," Davin said. "He is incorrect that this is a liability. It is the discovery. For 400 years my caste has held that a grava cannot be commanded, only compelled that you may aim it as you aim a landslide, but you may not ask it anything. And here is a human who has not aimed it, has not compelled it, controls nothing it needs, and the animal has followed him past its own food and laid its head in his hands." He leaned forward. "Talon, if the sallow hand comes and we sedate the animal to restore our command over it, we will have a sleeping weapon and a boarding action, which is to say, we will have nothing. But if the animal is awake, and it regards this station as its ground and the human is here, then we have, for the first time in the history of the caste, a grava that will defend a place because it wishes to, and not because it has been starved into it. I will not trade that for a chain of command. I would rather lose the station honestly than win it by proving, one more time, that we only know how to use the animal as a slave." It was, Vesk thought, an extraordinary thing to hear a Kelvas of the governing caste say aloud, and he watched it land on Overwarden Cass like a blow, because it was a blow. It was the first speaker of the caste declaring, in front of a Denvaki jurist and a Vorth observer and an Illith clerk, that 400 years of Cass's profession had been a slow crime that a cook had exposed in 6 days. Cass said, "As the first speaker wishes," in the voice of a creature filing something away, and Vesk should have paid more attention to the filing, and did not because the next thing that happened was the codification, and the codification was, in its way, the strangest thing Vesk saw in the whole affair, stranger than the animal. Because it was the moment he understood that the concordance was going to survive its encounter with humanity, by writing everything humans did into doctrine, and thereby never having to understand any of it. It began with the Vorth observer, whose entire function was to document, and who had spent 6 days documenting a food service contractor making coffee. The Vorth had recorded the ritual with the thoroughness of its kind, and on the 7th day it presented its findings to the Commission, and its findings were a doctrine. Vesk had a copy, everyone had a copy, it was distributed to the whole command staff, and he read it 3 times, and each time he was less sure whether he was reading a scientific paper or a scripture, and eventually he decided it was both, and that the concordance had never really distinguished the two. The Vorth had broken Cole's third watch into phases and named them. the cleaning of the drink station at the top of the watch, the Vorth called the preparation of the ground, the establishment, before the animal's attention was engaged, of a settled and predictable environment. The double run of the machine to clear the line the Vorth called the rejection of the first draw, and had written half a page on its significance, none of which had anything to do with why Cole actually did it, which was that the first pour was sludge. The making of 2 cups the Vorth called the division of the portion, and had marked as the central rite. The human, the doctrine held, established parity with the animal by preparing an identical portion for each, thereby signaling that the animal was neither above the human, to be feared, nor below it to be controlled, but beside it, a co-occupant of the ground. And the setting of the second cup on the floor at a fixed and courteous distance, the Vorth had named Vesk read it, and set the slate down, and picked it up, and read it again, the warm offering, and had written, in the flat translated prose of its kind, the sentence that Vesk would remember longer than almost anything else from the whole affair. The warm offering is not food. The animal does not require it and frequently ignores it. Its function is to make, twice per cycle, at a predictable hour, a gesture that costs the human effort, benefits the animal nothing, and asks the animal for nothing in return. In the study of the Grava, there is no prior record of any such gesture being offered by any handler. It is the assessment of this observer that the entire affiliative response documented aboard Havern's spindle proceeds from the animal's correct apprehension that the human wants nothing from it. This is, in the literature of the caste, an unprecedented condition. The recommendation of this observer is that it be designated a doctrine and taught. And the concordance, being what it was, taught it. Within a day the whole command staff was speaking of the warm offering and the division of the portion as though they were maneuvers, and first speaker Davin had begun to draft. Vesk saw the early pages, a revision to the caste's handling doctrine, 400 years old, to be retitled, in a phrase Davin chose himself, in which Cole, when Vesk read it to him, received with a long silence and then a short unhappy laugh. The handling of the Grava by means of leaving it alone. They wrote a manual, Cole said. A revision to a manual, Vesk said. It is very thorough. For being nice to a dog. For yes. Cole wiped the counter. He did this when he was thinking. Vesk had learned that too. They're going to teach a whole cast of handlers to make coffee at a fixed hour and call it a maneuver, he said. And it's still not going to work for most of them, and they're not going to understand why, and the reason is right there in their own paper, and they read right past it. He set the cloth down. It said the animal responds because I don't want anything from him. Right. That's the finding. That's the whole finding. He looked at Vesk. You can't teach that. The second you teach a handler to make the coffee so the animal will trust him, he wants something from the animal. And the animal knows, because the animal always knows, and now the coffee's a trick and the trick doesn't work. You can't fake not wanting anything. You either don't want anything or you're pretending, and a thing that size can smell the difference in the dark. He shrugged. I don't want anything from him. That's not a technique. That's just true. He came in, he lay down, I let him. I'd have done the same for a stray dog in an alley. That's the part they can't put in the manual, because the manual's the wanting. The manual is the whole caste wanting the animal to be a weapon, and he can smell the manual coming off them from 6 decks away. Vesk carried none of this up the spine, because Cole had not told him to, and because Vesk had begun to understand that some of what Cole said was not for the record, but he kept it. And when, years later, the revised doctrine had spread across the whole of Kelvas space, and the caste reported that it worked in perhaps 1 case in 4, and could not account for the failures, Vesk had thought, he told you. On the 7th day, over a counter, he told you exactly why, and you were writing it into a maneuver even as he said it, and that is why it will only ever work 1 time in 4, because 3 handlers in 4 will be running the maneuver, and the maneuver is the wanting, and the animal can smell the manual. Overwarden Cass filed his own report that day, and Vesk did not see it, because it did not go to the command staff. It went to the cast, directly, over a channel the overwarden was entitled to use, and that command did not monitor. And in it, Vesk reconstructed this later from the inquiry, from the record that came out when everything came out. Cass laid the whole affair before the handling cast's inner council, in terms the first speaker had not used and would not have permitted. He described a governing first speaker who had lost his nerve, seduced by a sentimental display into abandoning 400 years of hard doctrine. He described a war beast slipping out of the cast's control into the keeping of an alien food worker. He described a boarding threat closing on the station, and a first speaker who would rather lose it than restore the chain of command. And he requested, under a caste provision older than the concordance and never formally repealed, discretionary authority to secure the article, by whatever means the situation on the ground required. The caste's inner council, 6 handlers on a homeworld 11 days away who had spent their lives inside the doctrine Daven was preparing to overturn, granted it. Cass did not tell command, he did not tell the commission. He had, from the 4th day at the hatch, decided that the animal leaning its head into the human's chest was not a discovery but a disease, and that the honorable thing, the thing his whole life had trained him to believe, was to end the disease before it spread, restore the animal to the clean, hard fact of what it was, and take whatever consequences the Treaty Commission chose to hand a Kel Voss who had saved the station by doing his job. He had the delivery lance. He had from the cast stores aboard more of the compound. He had the codes to the galley's seals, because command had given them to the whole command staff so the perimeter could be managed, and no one had thought to take them back from the one member of the command staff who had argued for sedation every day since the first night. And he had, Vesk understood later, a kind of patience that Vesk had failed to credit, because Cass did not move on the 7th day or the 8th. He waited. He waited for the thing he knew was coming, the thing the traffic reports had been promising for days, because Overwarden Talon Cass had grasped something that command, in its careful decency, had not. That the best moment to sedate the animal and prove it a weapon was the exact moment the station needed a weapon, when everyone would be looking outward at the borders, and no one would be watching the galley. And if the sedation went wrong, if the animal woke in the interval between the dart and the dark and made its decision about the creature who had darted it, well, that would be the human's problem, and the human had been warned on the first night, in that very galley, that he should move away from the asset. The sallow hand came on the 9th day, at the top of the 3rd watch, and Vesk was in the galley when the station learned it was no longer alone. He had taken to spending the 3rd watch there, not because command required it, the liaison role only wanted him twice a day, but because he had discovered, sitting on the galley deck in the small hours with the human and the animal, a quiet he had never had anywhere else in his life. It was the quiet Cole manufactured and the animal lived in, the low murmur about nothing, the machine, the smell of the good pour, the great scarred flank rising and falling against the counter. Vesk was an Illith clerk from a crowded hive world. He had never in his life been in a room that was calm. He had not known rooms could be calm. He had spent 9 days learning it from a human and an alien war beast, and he had begun to think of the galley as the only place he had ever been where nothing was wanted from him. And he understood, dimly, that this was the same thing the animal had found, and that he and the ruin were, in the end, 2 creatures who had walked a long way toward the one person on the station who let them simply be furniture. So he was there on the 9th day at the top of the watch, when the spindle's alarm went to the specific hard tone that meant proximity contact, unfriendly, and then, seconds later, to the tone beneath it, the one no drill had ever made Vesk's plating crawl the way the live one did. Hull contact. Boarding. Cole looked up from the drink station. He had just run the machine to clear the line. He had in his hand the first of the 2 cups. "That the bad guys," he said. "That is the bad guys," Vesk said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt, and he realized, hearing it, that he had learned that too, from 9 days on the deck. That you kept your voice level not for yourself but for the room, because the room was listening, and the largest thing in the room was listening hardest of all. The ruin was on its feet. It had risen without a sound, and the drowsy half-attention was gone from it, burned off in an instant. And what stood in the galley now was the thing that had come down the spine on the first night, the landslide that had decided to be patient. But it was not looking at the hatch, or the alarm, or the dark beyond the hull. It was looking at Cole, and Vesk understood with a jolt that the animal was doing exactly what Cole had taught Vesk to do on the first day. It was reading the one calm creature in the room to find out how afraid it should be. "Easy," Cole said. He set the cup down, not on the floor this time, on the counter, unhurried, because a dropped cup was a fast movement and a fast movement was a wrong signal. "Easy, Bear. I know. I hear it too." He came around the counter, and he put his hand on the great scarred shoulder, and he began to move it in the slow, absent circle, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not hurry, and into the alarm and the hull contact tone and the distant first sounds of the sallow hand cutting their way into Havern's spindle, the human said, low and level and certain, the way you tell a working dog the thing it has waited its whole life to be told. "Okay, here's the part where you're a bear." The sallow hand had done its homework, and its homework was the silence. Vesk pieced the shape of the attack together later, from the logs, but he felt the shape of it in the moment, because the reavers came in the way you come into a house you have been told is empty. They cut 3 breaches, not one, spinward at the cargo throat and at the habring seam, and they came in fast and loud, and they did the thing you only do when you are certain the house has no dog. They moved toward the reactor and the reclaim and the water, the valuable soft insides of the station, without first securing their own backs. They were not fighting the spindle. They were stripping it. They believed the spindle's teeth were gone, and they had believed it for 9 days, watching the kennel alert cycle down into silence, and they had come to take a wounded station apart at their leisure. Command met them the way a garrison meets a boarding, which is to say bravely and inadequately. Havern's spindle carried a security complement, Denvaki mostly, a handful of Kelvas, a rotation of Concordance Marines, but a supply spindle is not a warship, and the security complement existed to handle a smuggler or a brawl, not 3 simultaneous breaches by a reaver crew that fought for its living. Vesk in the galley watched the repeater Cole had never bothered to turn off, and saw the station's defense buckle at all 3 points in the first 4 minutes, and understood that Havern's spindle, absent the thing it had kept in a box for 4 years, was going to fall. "There through the cargo throat," Vesk said. He heard his own voice stay level and was distantly proud of it. "Security is falling back to the ring junctions. Cole, they are the doctrine, the containment doctrine. It releases the animal automatically on a confirmed multi-point boarding. It should have." He stopped. He checked the repeater. He checked it again. "It has not released. The galley seals are still engaged. The animal is contained." "Course it is," Cole said. He had his hand on the ruin's shoulder still, the slow circle, holding the animal in the comm while the alarm shrieked. "Somebody turned off the automatic. Your overwarden probably wants to do it by hand. Wants it on the record that he let the dog out, not the machine." He didn't sound angry about it. He sounded like a man reading a weather report he'd expected. "He's been waiting for this. I clocked it days ago. Man's been looking at Bear like Bear's a mistake he's got to fix, and he's been waiting for the day the station needs the mistake bad enough that fixing it looks like saving everybody." "Then the seals will not open," Vesk said. "The animal cannot get out. It cannot defend the station. Cole, if the doctrine does not release it." "Vesk," Cole said it quietly, and Vesk stopped. The human was looking at him with that flat, tired patience, and behind the patience was something Vesk had not seen in him before, something level and cold and entirely without fear. And Vesk realized he was looking at the thing Cole's people meant when they called themselves a death-world species. Not the teeth, not the strength, but this. the capacity to be completely calm at the exact moment everything came apart. "The seals don't matter," Cole said. "The doctrine doesn't matter. The automatic doesn't matter. You're still thinking he's a weapon somebody points. He's not. He's a bear, and there's people coming into his ground, and the only thing keeping him in this room is me, and my hand, and the fact that I haven't told him it's okay to go." He took his hand off the animal's shoulder. "So I'm going to open the galley myself, the manual way, and I'm going to tell him it's okay, and then I'd get behind the counter if I were you, and I'd stay there. And whatever you hear out in the spine, you keep your voice level, because he'll be able to hear you the whole time, and if he hears you scared he might decide you're worth coming back to check on, and you do not want to be a thing he's checking on when he's working." Vesk got behind the counter. Cole crossed to the galley's manual seal, a heavy mechanical release the station kept in case the power doors failed, a wheel and a bar, the kind of thing that existed precisely because someone, long ago, had understood that on a bad enough day you could not trust the automatic. He set his hands on the wheel. He looked back once at the ruin, which stood in the center of the galley, all its drowsy 9 days burned away, watching him with an intensity that would have stopped Vesk's 4 hearts if it had been aimed at him. "Okay," Cole said. He turned the wheel. The seal ground back. The hatch cracked and the noise of the dying station came in, the alarm, the far crackle of weapons fire, the wet cutting sound of a reaver charge chewing through a bulkhead 2 decks down. "Bear." The animal looked at him. "Those aren't ours," Cole said, low level certain. "Go on." The ruin went through the hatch, and Vesk, crouched behind the counter, watching the repeater with his plating crawling, saw the last thing he would ever see of the animal on any screen for the next several minutes, which was a gray shape the size of a landslide moving down the spine of Havern's spindle at a walk, unhurried, toward the sounds of the men who had come to take its ground. And then the repeater in the cargo throat went dark, and the one at the ring junction went dark, and one by one down the spine. The feeds went out, and the station screens gave Vesk nothing but the sound. The sound was the part they never put in the doctrine, because the doctrine was written by people who watched the feeds, and the feeds went dark, and so the doctrine had a blank where the truth was. Vesk had the sound. He would have it for the rest of his life. He crouched behind the counter of a galley on a station being boarded by the worst crew in the tavern reach, with a human calmly re-engaging the manual seal behind the departed animal. "No sense letting the bad guys wander in here," Cole said, spinning the wheel shut. "While he's out." And Vesk listened to Havern's spindle stop being taken apart. It did not happen the way the alarm had led him to expect. He had braced for escalation, for the weapon's fire to rise, for the reaver charges to build to some crescendo. Instead, the sounds thinned. That was the thing no drill had prepared him for, the thing that told him in the oldest language there was, exactly what was happening in the dark decks the feeds no longer showed. The weapon's fire down the spinward corridor rose, sharp and frantic, 3 or 4 voices of it at once, and then it did not build. It stopped, not all at once. It stopped the way a conversation stops when the thing being discussed walks into the room. One weapon, then another, then a silence, and into the silence a single sound Vesk could not identify and did not want to, a short wet absence of a sound, and then nothing from the spinward corridor at all, ever again. Then the cargo throat. The reavers there had been loud, a whole boarding party of them, and Vesk heard their loudness change register, heard it go, over perhaps 90 seconds, from the confident noise of men stripping a station to the specific noise of men who have understood too late that the house was not empty. He heard a voice on their open channel, patched somehow into the station's net, and the translator caught it, thin and rising. "Not down, it's not going down, we hit it and it's not." And then that channel, too, joined the silence, and the silence came up the spine toward the galley the way the animal had come up it on the first night, unhurried, deck by deck, thorough. "Level," Cole murmured. He was crouched beside Vesk now, behind the counter, and he had a hand on Vesk's carapace, the same slow, absent circle he used on the animal, and Vesk understood that the human was gentling him exactly as he gentled the ruin, and that it was working because Vesk's 4 hearts had begun against all sense to slow. Keep it level. He's doing fine. That's just the sound of him doing fine. A pause. Down the spine, another weapon stopped. You hear how it gets quiet. That's the good sound. You want it quiet. Quiet means he's between them and us. He said it the way you'd narrate a dog working a field, a man who had heard this exact progression of sounds before, on a smaller scale, at the edge of a bad wood, and had learned young that the quiet was the safe part. The loud part's over there where he is. Over here it's quiet. Stay in the quiet. Vesk stayed in the quiet, and listened to the sallow hand discover, breach by breach, deck by deck, that Havern Spindle's teeth had never been gone at all, had only, for 9 days, been asleep in a galley with their head in a cook's lap, waiting for someone to be foolish enough to come into the ground the animal had decided, without asking anyone's permission, was now its own. Overwarden Talon Cass made his move while the feeds were dark, and it was, Vesk had to concede afterward, the correct moment, if you were the kind of creature who thought in moments. Cass had planned it for exactly this. Vesk reconstructed the whole thing later from the inquiry. The Overwarden had never intended to sedate the animal in the galley, where the human could interfere, and where the animal was calm, and where a dart would only prove the human's point. He had intended to sedate it here in the middle of a boarding, when it was loose and working in the dark decks, and no feed could see, when a dart in the animal's flank would read, in every log the Treaty Commission ever recovered, as a handler doing his duty in a crisis, securing a loose war beast that had slipped its keeper, restoring the article to the cast's control at the height of the station's need. The human's fingerprints would be all over the manual release. The story would write itself. The food worker let the animal out, the Overwarden brought it safely back under control, and if the animal, darted in the interval between the compound and the dark, chose to spend its last 3 lucid seconds on the nearest creature, well, the doctrine had always warned that the interval was dangerous, and Cass had planned to be the length of a corridor away when it closed. He had come down the spine behind the animal at a distance, tracking it the way only a Kelvas handler could track a Grava, by the silence it left, by the cooling of the corridors where the sound had stopped. He had the delivery lance. He had the compound. He had, Vesk would learn, requested and received the cast's discretionary authority 9 days ago, and had been waiting, patient as the animal itself, for the station to need the animal badly enough that darting it would look like rescue. What Cass had not counted on, what the whole 400 years of doctrine had not counted on, because the doctrine was built by handlers and handlers thought about the animal, and never, ever about the room, was that the animal was not the only thing in the dark decks that had learned something in 9 days. Vesk had learned something too. He had learned it on the galley deck, twice a day, from a human who talked about the coolers. He had learned that you keep your voice level because the room is listening. He had learned that the way you survive a thing much larger than you is not to run and not to freeze, but to keep working, afraid, at the one task in front of you. And he had learned, this was the part Cass could never have predicted, because Cass did not think clerks learned anything, that on a station in crisis, the most useful creature in the sector is the one who has read the manifests, who knows where everyone is supposed to be, and who notices, the way a clerk notices a delivery short by 2 pallets, when one of them is somewhere he is not supposed to be. Vesk noticed the Overwarden. He noticed him on the repeater's single surviving feed, the galley's own. The one coal had never turned off in the half-second before Cass passed out of its range down the spine. A flick of red harness at the edge of the frame, moving down station alone toward the dark decks where the animal was working. And Vesk, crouched behind the counter with a human's hand on his carapace, felt the whole 9 days arrange themselves into a single clean fact, the way a manifest resolves when you finally find the missing line. The Overwarden was not falling back with command. The overwarden was going toward the animal, alone, with something in his hands. "Cole," Vesk said, and he kept his voice level because the room was listening. "The overwarden is on the spine. He is going after Bear." Cole went very still. "He's got the lance," Cole said. It was not a question. "I believe he has the lance." And the human who had been calm through a boarding action, calm through a war beast walking out his door, calm through 9 days of murder suits at the hatch, said a single quiet word that Vesk had never heard him say, and then he stood up from behind the counter and reached for the wheel of the manual seal. And Vesk understood that the dangerous part of the night, the truly dangerous part, the part the doctrine had no page for, was only now beginning. "You are not going out there," Vesk said, and was astonished to hear himself say it because Vesk did not tell people things. Vesk stamped their requisitions. "Cole, the station is being boarded. The animal is working. If you go into the spine now, into the dark, with the reavers and Bear both loose, you will die, and not from the reavers." "Maybe," Cole had the wheel half-turned. "You got a better idea." "Command. Tell Command the overwarden has gone rogue with a delivery lance. Let Command." "Command's fighting for its life at 3 breaches and it thinks Cass is a hero for going after the loose animal," Cole said. "By the time I explain it, it's done." He turned the wheel the rest of the way. The hatch cracked on the spine and the sounds came in thinner now, the quiet coming up the decks. "Vesk, listen to me. If Cass puts that dart in him, one of 2 things happens. Either it drops him clean, and your Cass drags a sleeping war beast back to a box in the middle of a boarding action, and the reavers who are left finish taking the station, and everything Bear did tonight was for nothing. Or," he paused, "it doesn't drop him clean. There's a few seconds, Cass said it himself the first night, between the needle and the dark. A few seconds where he knows what got done to him. And where he is right now, working with his blood up, and the person who's been keeping him calm for 9 days a quarter-mile away behind a counter." Cole shook his head. "I'm not letting him spend those seconds figuring out on his own that people are the enemy after all. I told him people weren't. I told him that every night for 9 days with the coffee. If Cass makes a liar out of me, I want to be standing there when it happens. That's the whole job. That was always the whole job." He stepped through the hatch. "Stay here." Vesk did not stay there. He would think about that decision for a long time, and he would never be able to explain it in a way that satisfied the inquiry, because the honest explanation was not something an inquiry had a box for. He went into the spine after the human because 9 days on a galley deck had taught him that furniture survives and running gets you killed, and that there is a third thing, a thing Cole did, and the animal did and Vesk had never in his life done until that moment, which is to walk, afraid, at a level pace, toward the thing that frightens you, because someone you have decided is yours is already walking toward it, and you will not let them walk alone. He caught up with Cole 2 decks down, and the human glanced at him and did not send him back, and the 2 of them went down the spine of Havern's spindle together, a food service contractor and a junior clerk, into the quiet the animal had made. The quiet was the worst thing Vesk had ever walked through, and Cole walked through it like a man crossing a field after a storm. They passed the cargo throat. The reavers were not there anymore. Vesk did not look too long at the places where the reavers had been, and Cole, ahead of him, did not look at all. He kept his eyes up, down the spine, and his voice, when he spoke, stayed low and level and was not Vesk realized for Vesk. It was for the animal somewhere ahead in the dark, a running murmur of nothing pitched to carry. "It's just me, Bear, just me and the clerk, coming down the spine, nothing to do, just walking. You keep working. We're not the loud thing, we're the quiet thing. Here comes the quiet thing." He said it the way you announce yourself to a working dog in the dark so it does not mistake you, and Vesk understood that this was why Cole had insisted on going himself, not bravery, or not only bravery, but the simple fact that Cole was the one voice on the station the animal could not, mistake for prey. They found Cass at the ring junction, and they found him too late to stop him from setting up, and just in time to stop him from firing. The overwarden had taken a position at the junction's upper gantry, above the corridor mouth, in the cold, clean logic of a hunter who knows his quarry's path. Below him, down the corridor, the last of the sallow hand were dying. Vesk heard it, the thinning, the specific quiet. And toward the junction, unhurried, finishing its work. The gray landslide was coming, and Cass had the delivery lance to his shoulder, sighting down at the animal's approach, waiting for the clean flank shot he had waited 9 days for. Cass! Cole did not shout it. He stepped into the junction, into the open, into the animal's line of approach, and he said the overwarden's name at a conversational volume, and it landed in the quiet like a dropped tray. Put it down. Cass did not lower the lance. He did not look away from the sight. Food worker, he said, you should not have come. Go back to your galley. This does not concern you. You put a dart in him, Cole said, walking slow into the corridor toward the animal's path, toward the place where the lance was aimed. One of 2 ways it goes, and I've thought about both of them a lot in the last 2 minutes, and I don't like either one. So I'm going to stand here, right here, in your shot. He stopped in the corridor mouth, directly beneath the gantry, directly in the line between the lance and the animal. You want the flank shot, you're going through me. And your compound's cut for a grava, so it won't even slow me down. It'll just stop my heart. And then you've darted a food worker on a concordance station in front of a witness, and your first speaker won't be able to save you, and neither will your cast. So, put it down. Move, Cass said, and for the first time his voice cracked, not with fear but with something worse, the desperation of a creature watching the last shape of the world he understood dissolve. Move, human. That thing is not tame. It is not yours. It is a weapon of my caste, and it has been loose and killing on this station for 6 minutes, and I am the only creature aboard with the authority and the means to secure it, and I will secure it, and history will call it a rescue. Move, or I will put you both to sleep and secure the article over your body and let the commission decide which of us was the fool. His hand tightened. It killed my caste brothers, 2 handlers, good handlers. It killed them in that kennel doing exactly this, waiting, patient, calm, until they trusted it, and then. That calm is not affection, food worker. That calm is the most dangerous thing it does, and you have taught a station full of soft creatures to walk up to it and pour it a drink. The lance shifted, a fraction, off the animal onto Cole. You are going to get someone killed with your kindness. Better it be you than a child. And the animal arrived at the junction. It came into the light of the ring junction, and it stopped, and Vesk, pressed against the bulkhead, forgot to breathe. 9 days he had watched the ruin be gentle. He had watched it lean its head into a human's chest, watched it lap coffee, watched it sleep through the 4th hour bell. He had let himself forget a little in the galley's warm quiet what the animal was. Now he remembered. The thing that stood in the ring junction had come from the dark decks where the sounds had stopped, and there was no drowse in it and no lean, and it was the most purely dangerous thing Vesk had ever stood near, and it stood there in the open, and it did not look at the corridor it had cleared, and it did not look at the reavers it had finished, and it did not look at Vesk. It looked at Cole, and then slowly up at the gantry, at the red harness, at the lance. The sound started. Vesk felt it before he heard it, the same fault-line pressure from the first night, felt it in the deck and his plating and the fluid behind his eyes, and this time it did not stop. It built. The animal had made this sound once before, at a lance, on the first night, and that time it had lasted a breath and ended. This time the animal was not sleepy, and it was not calm, and it was not 9 days into trusting that people were not the enemy. It had just spent 6 minutes learning in the dark decks that some people very much were, and it stood in the junction with its blood up and looked at a Kelvas aiming a lance at it, and the sound it made was the sound of a decision being reached, and Vesk understood with total clarity that they were all about to die. Cass because the animal had priced him and found him an enemy, and Cole because Cole was standing in the middle of it, and Vesk because Vesk had come. Bear, Cole said. He did not shout it. Into the building pressure of that sound, the human said the animal's name, low and level and certain, the same 2 syllables he'd said every night over a cup of coffee, and he did the thing Vesk had watched him do 100 times and would never understand. He turned his back on the danger. He turned away from Cass, away from the lance, and he faced the animal, the enraged working war beast fresh from the dark, and he put out one hand, palm open, low, and he did not hurry and he did not raise his voice, and he said, into the sound that was shaking the deck, "Hey, hey, look at me, not him, me." The hand low, open, steady. I know what he's got, I see it. You leave him to me." A step toward the animal, unhurried into the sound. "That's not your job, that's mine. Your job's done. You did it. You cleared the whole spine, you did the whole thing, and it's done, and now it's the quiet part. Remember the quiet part." Another step. The sound did not stop, but it did not build. "Second pot's always better. Come on, it's mid-watch. We're way behind. Whole night's shot to hell, and you're standing here making that noise instead of drinking your coffee." The hand, the voice, the slow, absent certainty. "Easy, Bear, easy. I've got the loud thing, you be the quiet thing. Come on, buddy. Come get your coffee." And the sound stopped. It stopped the way it had stopped on the first night, all at once, a fault line deciding, this time not two. The animal's great scarred head came down. It looked at the human's open hand, and it looked at the human's face, and whatever it read there, the thing the Vorth had no category for, the thing 400 years of doctrine had missed, the thing Cole could not fake and would not try to, it read it, and it believed it, and the terrible gathered danger went out of the enormous shoulders by the fraction that only mattered because nothing about the ruin had ever eased for anyone but this one small, unafraid creature who wanted nothing from it. It crossed the junction to Cole. It put its head into his chest. The human staggered under the weight and braced and stood, one hand coming up between the animal's eyes, and above them on the gantry, Overwarden Talon Cass held a lance on the pair of them. A human and a war beast leaning into each other in the wreckage of a boarding action, and did not fire because Vesk saw it, saw the exact moment the Overwarden's whole life finished breaking. There was no longer any story in which firing made him a hero. There was only a story in which he put a dart into the one thing that had just proven his entire caste wrong, over the body of the creature that had proven it, and even Cass, even now, could not make himself the villain of that story. "Put it down, Talon." The voice came from the spineward corridor, and it was first speaker Davin and behind him came command and the Marines, and the last of the station's security arriving at the ring junction to find the boarding broken, the reavers gone, and their overwarden on a gantry with a lance leveled at a food worker and a grava. Davin took in the whole of it in a moment, the way the governing caste was bred to, and he said again, quietly with the full weight of the caste behind it, "Put it down. It is over. Look," he gestured at the animal, its head in the human's chest, its eyes closing. "Look at what you were going to shoot. Put it down and come here and look at it, and then tell me to my face that 400 years were right and 9 days were wrong." For a long moment Cass did not move. Then the red harness shoulders came down, and the lance came down with them, and the overwarden lowered the weapon he had carried for 9 patient days, and Vesk let out the breath he had been holding since the animal came into the light and thought, "It is over," and was wrong, but only about the timing, because the reckoning that came after was quieter than the boarding and lasted much longer, and Vesk was a part of all of it. The sallow hand had put 19 reavers aboard Havern's spindle, none of them left. The station's own dead numbered 6, all of them fallen in the first 4 minutes at the breaches, before the animal reached them, and Vesk noticed in the days after that the way command spoke about those 4 minutes changed everything about how the spindle came to understand what had happened. 6 of ours died in the time before the animal arrived. None died after. You could draw a line down the timeline of that night, and on one side of the line was the station defending itself the way stations do, bravely and inadequately, and on the other side of the line was the quiet, and the quiet had cost the spindle nothing at all. The reavers Vesk did not think about, and Cole did not think about, and the animal, so far as anyone could tell, did not think about, because to the animal they had simply been the loud thing in its ground, and the loud thing was no longer in its ground, and that was the whole of the animal's opinion on the matter. Vesk envied it that, a little. He had walked through the aftermath in the dark decks, and he had not looked too long, and he had still seen enough that he did not sleep well for a while. Cole had seen more and slept fine, and when Vesk asked him how, Cole had said only, "They came aboard to take the water and leave everybody here to suck vacuum. I did the arithmetic on them before we ever went down the spine. Bear didn't have to, lucky him." And that had been the end of it. The animal walked back up to the galley on its own, an hour after the junction, once the human had finished the coffee it was owed. That was the first thing Cole did. Once Davin had the overwarden in custody and command had the station in hand and the medics were moving through the decks. He took the animal back to the galley, and he cleaned the drink station, and he ran the machine twice to clear the line, and he made 2 cups of the good pour, and he set one on the floor at the polite distance, because it was mid-watch and they were, as he'd said, way behind. Vesk sat on the deck at the end of the dish line in his place, and watched a war beast that had just cleared a station of 19 armed reavers lap coffee off a galley floor, and then lean its head into a cook's chest and close its eyes. And he understood that for the animal nothing had changed at all, that the boarding, and the darkness, and the sound at the junction, had been a brief loud interruption in the only life it had ever wanted, which was this one. The quiet, the warm cup, the guy who talked about the coolers and wanted nothing. "He's really okay," Vesk said. It came out as something between a statement and a plea. "He's fine." Cole had his hand between the animal's eyes. "This is the easy part for him. This was never hard for him. The dark decks, the reavers, none of that was hard. You saw how it got quiet. That's a thing that's easy for him, God help us all." He was quiet a moment. "The hard part was the box. 4 years in the box, doped stupid, everybody who came near him coming to do something to him. That was the hard part. That's the part that made the scars, not tonight." He looked down at the animal. "Tonight was just Tuesday for a bear. It's the box that breaks them. Remember that when your commission decides what to do with him. It was never the fighting that was the problem. It was the box." Vesk carried that up the spine too, in his own words, when the commission asked him, because by then he had understood that carrying Cole's words up the spine, accurately in the fewest words the truth allowed, was the most useful thing a junior clerk could do in the whole affair, and possibly the most useful thing he would ever do. The Treaty Commission reconvened on the 10th day, and this time it was not angry, and this time it did not know what it was, which Vesk came to think was a great improvement. Overwarden Talon Cass was not present. He was confined to quarters under caste discipline, pending an inquiry that would, in the fullness of time, strip him of his harness and his rank and send him home, not for cruelty, because the doctrine he had followed was the caste's own and no court could convict a creature of following the law as written, but for the discretionary channel, the private request to the inner council, the 9 patient days of planning to sedate the animal in secret against the express order of the first speaker he served. Cass had been willing to lose the station to prove the animal was a weapon. That, in the end, was the thing the caste could not forgive, once the caste had a first speaker who had looked at the animal with his own eyes and seen something else. Vesk saw Cass exactly once more, weeks later, on the day he shipped out. The two of them passed in a spinward corridor, the disgraced overwarden and the junior clerk who had noticed him on a repeater and started him down the road to this, and Vesk braced for hatred and got, instead, a long, unreadable look, and then a thing Cass said that Vesk turned over for years. "Do you know why it never killed the human?" Cass said. "He did not stop walking. He said it in passing, the way you drop a weight you have carried too far. I have thought about it every day. It killed 2 of my caste brothers who fed it and controlled it and gave it everything, and it laid its head in the hands of a creature who gave it a hot drink and asked it for nothing." He was past Vesk now, speaking over his shoulder. "My brothers wanted it to be a weapon. The human wanted it to be a bear. It is not that the human was kind, clerk. Many were kind. It is that the human was not afraid and did not lie about it and wanted nothing. That is the rarest thing in the galaxy, and it turns out it is the only thing that ever mattered, and my caste spent 400 years being certain it was the one thing that did not. And then he was gone down the corridor, and Vesk never saw him again, and thought, watching him go, that of everyone on Havern's spindle, the overwarden might have understood the animal best of all and been broken by understanding it, because understanding it too late is its own kind of box. But that was later. On the 10th day the commission reconvened, and the question before it was simple to ask and impossible to answer. What was the animal now? It was, by treaty, an article, one of 9, held under containment, the Kelvas cast's card to play when the talking got hard. It had, on the 9th day, defended a concordance station against a confirmed multi-point boarding, exactly as the doctrine of deterrence intended. By every letter of every law, nothing had changed. The Grava had done the thing a garrison Grava was kept to do, and the correct next step was to repair the kennel, restore the article to containment, and reset the 4-year clock. And no one in the wardroom could say the words. It was First Speaker Davin who finally said the thing that broke the deadlock, and he said it the way Vesk had come to expect of him, quietly, with the weight of the whole cast behind it, and something underneath the weight that Vesk had learned by then to recognize as grief. "We will not put it back in the box," Davin said. "First Speaker," said the Dinvaki jurist Sorol-Ka carefully, "the treaty is specific. An article held at a garrison station is held under containment. There is no provision for a Grava that is not contained. If we do not return it to the kennel, we are in violation of the article that permits it to exist at all. The number is 9, and it is 9 because it is contained. An uncontained Grava is not a treaty article. It is simply a Grava, loose, on a station. And there are 40 species in this concordance who negotiated for 20 years to make certain that thing did not exist." "I know what I negotiated," Davin said. "I was in the room. I held the line at 9 when a great many wanted 0, and I told them 9 because contained." He was silent a moment. "And I was wrong, jurist. Not about the number, about the containment. We told the concordance that the only safe Grava was a caged one, and we believed it, because in 400 years we had never made another kind. And then a food worker made another kind in 9 days, with a hot drink, in front of all of us. And now you are asking me to put that back in the box to satisfy a clause that was written in ignorance of the thing we now know." He leaned forward. "The treaty says the number is 9 because a Grava cannot be trusted. I am telling the commission, as the first speaker of the caste that made them, that this is no longer entirely true, and that I would rather renegotiate the treaty than put a thing that has just saved this station back into the dark that made its scars. Write it down. Send it to the assembly. Let them argue for another 20 years, but the animal does not go back in the box. I will resign the caste before I sign that order. I have signed enough of them." The concordance did what the concordance always did with a thing it could not resolve. It made a temporary arrangement, and then let the temporary arrangement become permanent by never getting around to changing it. The animal would remain on Havern's spindle. Not in the kennel was sealed, its sedation feeds drained, and over the following months it was quietly converted to other uses, and Vesk noticed that no one, not even the Kelvas, ever proposed reactivating it. The animal would remain under observation, a phrase the commission chose precisely, because it committed the concordance to nothing, and the observation would be conducted by the personnel who had established a working relationship with the article, and the personnel who had established a working relationship with the article were a food service contractor named Cole Pryor and a junior quartermaster's clerk named Vesk. And so it was that Vesk received, on the 11th day, a formal reassignment that changed the whole course of his life, and that read, in the flat prose of concordance personnel management, seconded to special observation, Article Grava 7, indefinite. He took it down to the galley to show Cole. It was mid-watch. Cole read it off the slate and he snorted and he said, "Congratulations. You're a dog sitter now, same as me." "It says observation," Vesk said. "It says article, it says nothing about." "It says whatever it needs to say so the suits can sleep," Cole said. "You know what it means. It means they've made it your job and my job to keep the scariest animal in the sector happy, and the way you keep him happy is coffee and quiet and never wanting anything from him, and they're going to call that observation because they can't call it what it is." He set the slate down. "You know what it is." "What is it?" Vesk said. Cole made 2 cups of the good pour. He set one on the floor. The animal rose and lapped it and leaned its head into the human's chest and closed its eyes, and Cole stood there, braced under the weight of it, one hand between the great scarred eyes, and he said, in the tone of a man stating the obvious, the tone he'd used for 9 days about the coolers and the oil substitution and the seal on the number 3 cooler, "It's a dog with a job and a place by the fire. Finally, 400 years and 19 dead reavers later." He looked down at the animal. Somebody was always going to figure it out. Wasn't going to be a caste that spent 4 centuries being scared of it. Was always going to be some idiot who wasn't scared enough to know better, standing there with a spare cup. He shrugged. "Turned out to be me. Could have been anybody." "Could have been you." He glanced at Vesk. "Give it a year on that deck, it'll be you too. You'll see. You're already halfway a bear person and you don't even know it." Vesk, sitting on the deck at the end of the dish line in his place, with a war beast breathing slow against a cook's chest, and the good pour going bitter in the cup he had learned over 11 days to pour for himself, thought that Cole was probably right, and found to his surprise that he did not mind. The story got out, the way stories do, and the story that got out was not the true one, and Vesk spent a good deal of the following year being asked to correct it and failing. What got out first was the shape the concordance liked, that a Kelvas war beast had broken containment on a garrison station, and that the station's personnel had heroically re-established control in time to repel a sallow-hand boarding action, and that the incident demonstrated the enduring value of the deterrence doctrine. It was a clean story, and it was false in every part that mattered, and Vesk watched it circulate on the concordance channels with the particular helplessness of a clerk who knows the true figures and cannot get anyone to look at them. Then the other story got out, the human story which traveled human channels, because humanity was new and loud and could not keep a good story to itself. And the human story was closer to true and worse in its own way, because the humans made it a legend, and a legend flattens a thing as surely as a doctrine does. In the human telling, a lone human had faced down a monster with nothing but a cup of coffee and a steady nerve, and had walked it like a dog, and had turned the galaxy's most feared weapon into a pet, and this was very nearly what had happened, and it left out everything that made it matter. It left out the 9 days. It left out the box, and the 400 years, and the reason the coffee worked, which was not courage but the absence of wanting. It left out that Cole had been a little afraid the whole time and had said so. It made Cole a hero, and Cole, when the human channels came looking for the hero, closed the galley hatch in their faces and told Vesk to route them all to command, and never gave a single account of the night to anyone who was not under oath. "They want the guy who tamed the monster," Cole said when Vesk asked why he wouldn't talk to them. "There isn't one. I didn't tame anything. I made coffee and I didn't jump. Anybody could have done it and nobody did for 4 years because they were all too smart to try. That's not a story that helps anybody. The story that helps somebody is the one where the box is the problem, and nobody wants that one because everybody's got a box for something." He wiped the counter. "So they can have command story or they can have the legend, and both of them are wrong, and I'll keep the real one. It's mine and the bear's and yours. That's enough people to know a true thing." But Vesk did not have the luxury of keeping the true one to himself, because Vesk was called to the assembly. The assembly hearing was the largest room Vesk had ever entered, and it was full of the highest creatures of the concordance, and they had convened 40 species, 2 decades of treaty, 20 years of a number that was 9 because contained, to decide whether the number was still 9, and whether it was still contained, and what to do about a species that had walked into the middle of their oldest fear and dismantled it with a hot drink. They called witnesses. They called first speaker Davin who told them without flinching that 400 years of his caste's doctrine had been wrong, and that he would rather renegotiate the treaty than pretend otherwise. They called the Vorth observer, who presented the warm offering and the division of the portion in its flat filing prose, and concluded that the affiliative response proceeded from the human wanting nothing, and watched an assembly of admirals fail to understand a sentence it had written down. They called Station Master Vol and command staff and medics and the surviving Reaver. There had been one, taken alive at the Habring breach, who described, in a voice that had not steadied in a month, the moment the loud thing in the corridor understood that the house was not empty, and who could not be induced to describe anything after that. And they called Vesk, junior quartermaster's clerk Illith, seconded to special observation, Article Grava 7 indefinite. He stood in the largest room in the concordance, before more admirals than he had known existed, and they asked him the question the whole assembly had convened to answer, the question the Vorth's doctrine could not answer and Davin's grief could not answer, and the legend could not answer. How had a food service contractor accomplished, in 9 days, with no training and no authority and no weapon, what the entire Kelvas beast-handling caste had failed to accomplish in 400 years? And Vesk, who had learned on a galley deck to tell the truth in the fewest words the truth allowed, said, he called it a bear. The room waited for more. Vesk understood they wanted more, wanted a method, a technique, a doctrine they could take home and apply, some transferable procedure that would let them own the thing without becoming the kind of creature who could do it. He understood that the warm offering was already being copied across Kelvas space, that handlers were being taught the division of the portion, that the whole caste was running the maneuver, and that it was working one time in 4 and no one could say why the other 3 failed. He understood that everyone in that enormous room wanted the trick, and that there was no trick, and that this was the one thing he had come all this way to make them understand, and the one thing they were structurally incapable of hearing. So he told them the rest of it in the fewest words the truth allowed. He told them about the box and the 4 years of the fog and every hand that had ever come near the animal coming to do something to it. He told them the human had wanted nothing, not the animal's obedience, not its power, not its safety even, only its company, the way you want the company of a stray dog at the edge of the firelight. He told them the human had named it after a dangerous animal from his own death world that he knew how to be around, and had treated it exactly like that animal, and that the animal had become exactly that animal, because that was what it had been offered, and it was the first thing it had ever been offered that did not have a hook in it. He told them the human had said you cannot teach it, because the second you teach a handler to make the coffee so the animal will trust him, the handler wants something, and the animal can smell the manual coming. That is why it works one time in 4, Vesk said, into the largest and most silent room he had ever stood in. 3 handlers in 4 are running the maneuver because they want the animal. The 4th one, for whatever reason of their own, has stopped wanting the animal and started wanting the animal's company, and the animal knows the difference, because the animal has always known the difference, because knowing the difference is the only thing 400 years in the box ever taught it. He folded his 4 hands. You asked how the human did it. He did it by not wanting the thing you all want. That is the whole answer. There is nothing under it. I am sorry it is not a procedure. I have watched a great many of you try to make it a procedure, and I have watched it fail, and it will keep failing, because the moment it becomes a procedure it becomes the wanting, and the wanting is the box, and the animal can smell the box in the dark from 6 decks away. He paused. I know this because for 11 days I sat on a galley deck and stopped wanting anything from the most dangerous animal in the sector, and it laid its head down beside me. Not because I learned a maneuver, because I stopped. That is the only doctrine there is, and you cannot write it down, because the writing of it is the breaking of it." The assembly thanked the witness and dismissed him, and Vesk went home to Havern Spindle, and the assembly argued for a long time, and in the end it did what Daven had predicted. It made a temporary arrangement and let it become permanent by never changing it. The number stayed 9 on paper. The word contained quietly acquired a footnote. And across Kelvas space, in the years that followed, one Grava in 4 came slowly out of the dark, into a life with a name and a job and a place by the fire, and 3 and 4 did not, and the cast never did understand the pattern, though it was written plainly in every word Vesk had said, and every word Cole had said before him, because the pattern was not a thing you could understand from outside the wanting, and the cast was made of the wanting, and could not step out of it any more than a fish steps out of water. What changed in the wider galaxy was not the doctrine. What changed was the file on humanity. Vesk watched it change from the inside, because he had become, without ever intending to, a minor authority on the subject. The clerk who had been there, the witness the assembly had called, the Illith who could explain, better than most, the thing the humans had done. He was asked about it often in the years after, and he came to understand that the question underneath the question was always the same, and that it was the question the whole concordance had been quietly asking about humanity since the day the Deathworld species first walked into the assembly with an unreasonable number of teeth and an inexplicable warmth toward the things that had grown them. The concordance had a file on humanity, and the file said Deathworlder, and the file was correct as far as it went. Humans came from a world that had tried to kill them by every means a world had, and had failed, and the concordance had expected the survivors of such a world to be hard, and they were. What the file had gotten wrong, what the whole concordance had gotten wrong, until a food worker on a garrison station made it impossible to keep getting wrong, was the direction of the hardness. The concordance had assumed that a species forged against a death world would meet the universe with teeth. And humanity did have teeth, and the surviving Reaver could attest to that, and the 19 who did not survive could not. But that was not the thing about humanity that rearranged the file. The thing that rearranged the file was that a species forged against a death world had come out of it not afraid. That was the discovery, and Vesk was one of the few who understood that it was the discovery. Not that humans were dangerous. Everyone had assumed humans were dangerous. That humans were not afraid of dangerous things. That a species could grow up in the teeth of a world and come out the far side having decided, somewhere along the way, that the correct response to a monster was not a cage but a name, not a weapon but a place by the fire, not fear but the flat, unbothered, wanting nothing steadiness that a food worker had carried into a galley on the worst night of a station's life, and used to gentle the galaxy's oldest fear. The concordance had spent 40 species and 20 years, and one enormous negotiated number building cages for the things it was afraid of. And humanity had looked at the most feared thing in the sector, and had not built a cage because humanity, alone among all of them, had never learned to be afraid of the dark, the way the rest of the galaxy was afraid of it. Humans had grown up in the dark. It was where they kept their dogs. They sent us their soldiers, we thought, a Denvaki admiral said to Vesk years later at a function Vesk had been invited to as the clerk who was there. When humanity joined, we waited to see the soldiers, the warships, the teeth. We were braced for the teeth. The admiral turned its cup in its hands. And they sent us their soldiers, yes, but that was not the thing we should have watched. The thing we should have watched was that they brought their animals. Every human posting, every station, every ship, within a year there was a dog, a cat, a bird, some deathworld creature they had carried across the stars because they could not imagine a life without one. We filed it as sentiment. We should have filed it as doctrine. It drank. A species that carries its predators to the stars as companions is not a species that fears the dark, and a species that does not fear the dark will do the one thing the rest of us never could. It will walk up to the thing in the dark, and it will not build a cage, and it will offer the thing a hot drink, and the thing will follow it home. The Admiral set down its cup. We kept 9 of them in boxes for 20 years, clerk, because we were afraid. It took a human 2 months to look at one of our boxes and ask why nobody had ever walked the dog. It shook its heavy head. We are going to be a very long time understanding what we let into the assembly the day we let them in. Vesk agreed that they were, and went home to the galley, where the understanding, such as it was, had never been complicated at all. Havern Spindle went back to being a supply-end garrison station, which is to say it went back to being boring, and the boredom was the animal's reward and Cole's design, and in the end, the whole point. The traffic came back. It came back faster than Command expected, and Vesk, who still thought like a clerk even after everything, understood why from the manifests before Command understood it from anything. The silence that had drawn the sallow hand had been replaced, out in the dark lanes of the tavern reach, by a new story, and the new story was worse for a reaver than any war beast in a box had ever been. The old story had been Havern Spindle has a grava, and you did not hit a station with a grava, but a grava was a known quantity, a caged thing, a risk a bold crew might weigh. The new story was Havern Spindle has a grava that likes them, and there is no arithmetic a reaver can do with that. A caged weapon has limits. A weapon that has decided the station is its ground, and defends the ground because it wishes to, and is kept happy by a cook who wants nothing, and will therefore never make a mistake a handler makes, that is not a risk you weigh. That is a place you do not go. The honest traffic understood this too, and the honest traffic came back thicker than before, because there is no safer place in a bad neighborhood than the one the monster has decided to love, and Havern Spindle became, over the following years, the busiest and safest station in the Reach, and its deterrent slept in the galley through the 4th hour bell, and had never once been pointed at anything in its life. The animal did not go back in a box, and it did not roam the station either, because Cole would not have it wandering the deck's unsettling crew who had every right to be unsettled. It kept to the galley and the spineward corridors and a run of the Hab ring that Command quietly closed to other traffic and never officially designated as anything, and which the crew came to call, without irony and without ever writing it down, the yard. The animal walked the yard at night. Vesk walked it with him, some nights once he had learned to, and it was the strangest and calmest thing he ever did with his life. A junior clerk and a war beast walking a slow circuit of a closed corridor in the small hours while the station slept, and nothing else walked those decks at night ever. And Vesk understood that this was the whole of the animal's job now, and that it was the same job it had done at the edge of a bad wood on a world it had never seen, walk the fence line at night. So that nothing else does. New crew came aboard over the years, and Command developed a quiet ritual of its own for them, unwritten and never named, which was that on a new crewman's first third watch someone senior would walk them down to the galley and sit them at the end of the dish line and let them meet the animal, and let the animal read them, and let them feel in their own body the exact fear Vesk had felt on the first day and the exact strange easing that came after if it came. Most of them it came for, in time. A few it never did, and those few requested transfers, and Command granted them without comment, because Command had learned. This was perhaps the only thing Command truly learned from the whole affair, that a creature who could not put the wanting down had no business on the third watch, and that this was not a failing, only a fact, the same fact the young handler had run into on the third day, and the same fact the assembly had crossed the galaxy to hear and had not been able to keep. You either wanted nothing from the animal or you did not belong in the room. There was no maneuver for it. There never had been. But Cole never left. Command offered him things, over the years, a title, a transfer, a promotion off the third watch into daylight and rank, and a role that came with a name the org chart could recognize. He turned all of it down, and he turned it down the same way each time, which was to point out that he had a job already and that the job was the third watch, and that the animal had learned the third watch and did not need to learn a new one on Cole's account. "He's on my clock now," Cole told Vesk, the first time command tried to move him to days. 4 years of no clock at all in a box, and now he's got one, and it's the third watch, and I'm not going to be the guy who changes it on him. That's the whole thing, that a bear's got a clock and you keep it. You don't move a working dog's whole world around to suit an org chart." He wiped the counter. "Besides, I like the third watch, always did, quiet, nobody wanting anything." He glanced at the animal. "Turns out I'm not that different from him. Maybe that's the trick nobody wants to hear either. Takes a guy who wants the quiet as bad as the bear does. You can't fake that either." Vesk stayed too. He had a career, in theory, back in the quartermaster's track, and Taub, before he retired, told Vesk plainly that he was throwing it away, that a clerk of his ability sitting on a galley deck pouring coffee for a monster was a waste the service could not afford, and that Vesk should think hard about it. Vesk thought hard about it and stayed, and when Taub asked him why, Vesk gave the old clerk the truest answer he had, which was the answer Cole had given him, and the answer the whole affair came down to, and the answer the assembly had crossed the galaxy to hear and had not been able to keep. "Because there is a room on this station," Vesk said, "where nothing is wanted from me. There is only the one I have looked. It is the galley on the third watch, with the human and the animal and the coffee and the talk about the coolers. I sat in it afraid for 11 days, and then one day I was not afraid anymore, and I have never found another room like it in my life, and I do not believe I will." He folded his hands. "You taught me the manifests, sir, and I was good at them, and I was wanted for them every day by everyone. The galley is the only place I have ever been where I could put the wanting down. I think it is the only place the animal has ever been where it could put the wanting down too. I think that is what we are, the animal and the human and me, 3 creatures who found the one room in the galaxy where nobody wants anything and decided to stay in it." He paused. "You may still think it is a waste. You are probably right. But I have watched a great many creatures who were not wasting their lives, and none of them were as calm as I am on that deck, and I have decided that calm is not nothing. I think it might be the whole thing. I think the human knew that from the start. I think it is the only thing he ever knew, and it turned out to be enough to gentle the galaxy's oldest fear, so I have stopped believing it is small." Taub looked at him for a long moment, the way a wall looks at a thing that has grown up next to it, and then he said, "The human has ruined you for the service, Vesk." And it was, in Illith, a blessing and not a complaint, and the old clerk retired the next month and left Vesk his good stylus, and Vesk kept it on the galley counter, and never used it for a manifest again. The years took the animal the way years take everything, slowly and then a little faster, and there came a time when the gray of its hide had gone grayer, and the scars stood out paler, and it slept more and walked the yard less. And Cole, who had gone a little gray himself by then, the way humans do, the muzzle color coming up in the stubble, adjusted the routine around the animal's age the way he had adjusted it around everything, without comment, without fuss. Wanting nothing from the animal it could no longer give. Vesk was there on the last night, though he did not know at the start of the watch that it was the last night, because you never do. It was mid-watch. Cole cleaned the drink station at the top of the shift, the way he always had. He ran the machine twice to clear the line. He made 2 cups of the good pour, the second pot, the one that came after the sludge, and he set one on the floor at the polite distance. And the animal, old now, slow now, but the same animal, the same flat, unhurried apex that had come down the spine on the first night and priced a station, and found only one thing on it worth lying down beside, rose, and crossed the galley, and lapped the coffee in 3 slow passes of that great dark tongue, and then it put its head into the human's chest. And Cole braced under the weight of it the way he had for years, one hand coming up between the old gray eyes, and he said, low and level and certain, the way he said everything to the animal, "Yeah, I know, long shift. Long shift for everybody." And the animal closed its eyes. in a room that contained two other living creatures, and did not open them again. Vesk sat on the deck at the end of the dish line, in his place, and understood before Cole said anything that the animal was gone, because the room had changed in the way a room changes, and because Cole had gone very still with his hand between the great gray eyes and was not saying anything at all, and the not saying went on for a long time. Then Cole took his hand away and he straightened, and he looked down at the animal that had cleared 4 decks in 2 minutes and 19 reavers in 6, and had spent the rest of its life asleep against a galley counter through the 4th hour bell. And he did not weep, because he was a death-world creature, and had done his weeping young at the edge of a bad wood, over other animals he had known how to be around. He looked at it for a while. And then he did the only thing there was to do, the thing his whole life had been, the thing that had gentled the galaxy's oldest fear because it was the one thing in the galaxy with no hook in it. He went back to the drink station, and he made one more cup of the good pour, and he set it on the floor at the polite distance, next to the animal, where the animal was not going to drink it and never had needed to. "Second pot's always better," Cole said to the room, to the animal, to no one. "You earned it, bud. Whole station still standing. Not bad for a stray nobody ever walked." He picked up his own cup. He leaned against the counter. And the human drank his coffee beside the oldest fear in the sector, gone quiet at last, unbothered, wanting nothing, in a bright galley on the 3rd watch. And after a while he looked over at Vesk, who had not moved from his place on the deck, and said the thing Vesk had come, over all the years, to understand was the truest thing anyone had said in the whole long affair. "They were all scared of the wrong part," Cole said. "The whole galaxy scared he'd hurt somebody." He looked down at the animal. "The part you had to watch out for was that he'd get old, same as any dog, same as anything you keep by the fire." He drank. "That's the deal you make. That's the only deal there ever is. You don't get the good part without the last part." He set his cup down, gentle, on the counter. "Worth it every time, every single time." And he crouched down beside the animal, and he put one hand on the old gray's shoulder in the slow, absent circle, one last time, for no reason, for nothing, wanting nothing, and the two of them stayed like that in the bright, quiet galley while the 3rd watch ran out toward the 4th hour bell. And Vesk sat with them in his place, in the one room in the galaxy where nothing was ever wanted, and understood that it had never been the coffee, and had never been the courage, and had only ever been this. A creature that walked up to the thing in the dark, and gave it a name, and stayed until the end.